Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1101, The Feast. To be able to gain the position of a hall leader in a 10th grade sacred place, Master Shen was definitely a clever man. He was indeed acutely aware of what it meant for Yolanda, the leader of the Mist Palace, to turn up unexpectedly and take Zen away personally. Though he fell short in terms of the ability to carry out an investigation and deduce the secrets within, he didn't need to know that. It was more than enough for him to be enlightened that the one who took Zen away was the leader of the Mist Palace and also the daughter of a Supreme Lord. When she had come here, the Lord of the Spirit Reading World had personally welcomed her. The 36 hall leaders didn't even have the chance to meet her. From the very beginning, Master Shen had considered that Zen might have a solid base and strong background within the sacred place. It was also because of the Saint Lord's orders that they had brought him to the holy city. However, little did he expect that Yolanda would come to this supreme world and take Zen to the Mist Palace herself. Such a background truly made Master Shen afraid for a while. They even cautiously recalled whether they had taken good care of Zen on their way to the holy city. And now, Zen had currently returned to the spiritual force sacred place. Undoubtedly, that was a journey across over 1,000 supreme worlds. Even if it was Master Shen himself, crossing over the same distance was still an exceedingly difficult task. He would probably have to spend all of his wealth and endless time. Zen had left for the Mist Palace, which was over 1,000 supreme worlds away, and just briefly returned. Even Zen hadn't realized that this was a magnificent feat in many warriors' eyes. At the very least, there weren't many Soul Sea Realm warriors who could cross over so many supreme worlds. Only the top talents of supreme worlds had the resources and ability to do so. Master Shen then discreetly swept his gaze over the place and immediately recognized the heavenly phoenix horse behind Zen. Although he was unable to determine the origin of the sword in Zen's hand, spotting a first-rank divine weapon based on his experience was easy as falling off a log. Likewise, the strong aura of the law power, being faintly transmitted from the sword, was too outstanding among the first-rank divine weapons for him not to notice. If it was merely an ordinary warrior leading a heavenly phoenix horse and holding a first-rank divine weapon instead of Zen, Master Shen might seriously scheme to kill him and seize his treasures away. After all, obtaining these extraordinary things in this life would be rather difficult for him. Be that as it might, he didn't have the guts to act rashly and assault Zen. Not only did he not dare to behave recklessly, he even raised his hand and destroyed Julian's blood essence. Then he refined it into a piece of blood essence spirit. Soon after, he found himself apologetically handing over the blood essence spirit to Zen. He had cultivated the dark blood cultivation, which is to extract his own blood essence entirely and reconstruct his physical body. But unfortunately, he was unable to do a physical body reconstruction. This blood essence spirit is a superb tonic, Zen. Please consider this as compensation. Zen gazed indifferently at the blood essence spirit in Master Shen's hand. It was of little use to him, but he did not reject it. Instead, after he received it from Master Shen, he handed it to Freya, who was beside him. Your uncle is, after all, a close relative of yours. You should accept this blood essence spirit. Freya's body trembled slightly at Zen's words. Before Master Shen came over, she had already given up hope. When Zen showed up, she had surprisingly seen hope from despair. Then, Master Shen appeared and she helplessly fell into despair again soon after seeing a glimmer of hope. Her state of mind seemed to be in a roller coaster ride, experiencing many ups and downs. What she hadn't thought of was that the moment Master Shen had arrived, he was genuinely very polite to Zen. And one could even see the flattery in his eyes. To apologize to Zen, he had even raised his hand and exterminated her uncle's blood essence body. What background did Zen have? For a warrior, a year was not way too long. Memories of her and Zen were still vivid in Freya's mind as if they all happened only yesterday. In the ascending well, Zen had been fully immersed in his thoughts while Freya had spoken confidently. He had kept silent as if he had nothing to say. Then he had spent almost no time getting used to the vitality between heaven and earth in the upper world. Warriors in the ascending wells were all from the lower world. But presently, the majority of the warriors who had ascended with them were still mining. Freya herself was more than lucky enough to have left the mine in a short time. But she hadn't expected that Zen already possessed such a status. Freya couldn't still figure out what had happened to Zen in the short span of a year. Freya hardly threw a glance at the blood essence spirit in her hand after receiving it from Zen. Although she knew that it was notably beneficial to a warrior, she chose not to absorb it. Instead, she stored it carefully in the space ring. It was the blood essence spirit of Julian, her uncle. A smile hung on Master Shen's face as he continued, Zen, since you are already here, why not come to our spiritual force sacred place for a chat? If a warrior from the 13 palaces cultivated successfully, he would surely have a significant position in the alliance. Although this was something that would likely happen in the far future, Master Shen was quite clear that he should be on friendly terms with Zen. Zen did not decline Master Shen's sincere invitation. He had plenty of time for this trip to the Dark World anyway. Thus, Zen and Master Shen left the city together at once. Freya, on the other hand, remained sitting dazedly on the heavenly phoenix horse. The light in her eyes constantly flickered, but she was still in a daze. Master Shen was in charge of the Void Flower Hall in the Spiritual Force Sacred Place. The said hall was located in another large city. Although this city was incomparable to the holy city of the Spiritual Force Sacred Place, it was still not relatively small. After their arrival at the hall, Master Shen treated Zen with proper decorum at its finest. And Freya, who was at the side, seemed to be in a dream from beginning to end. She was also a Soul Sea Realm warrior equipped with a lot of experiences in the lower world. In the upper world, she realized her insignificance. The lord of a city held an incredibly powerful existence in her eyes. With this, she highly regarded Master Shen as he was in control of 1,000 cities. The Saint Lord of this sacred place, the Lord of this world, and even a Supreme Lord, for her, these were all legendary existences that were far beyond her reach. Freya felt like an awkward villager in a remote village, while these people were emperors. She had never thought that she would meet a Supreme Lord in her life. In other words, even if a Supreme Lord were to appear in front of Freya now, she would probably act the same as she was facing Master Shen. Each of the exquisite dishes laid out in front of them was all made of expensive raw materials, such as the red lustrous fruit, the jade sea wine, and the milky yellow thick soup with a pleasant smell. If this were in the lower world, they would be considered top-grade treasures. And one would seriously have to refine them into pills to bring out the best medicinal effects. But here, they were just made into ordinary dishes. This was a complete waste. In order not to squander such valuable things, Freya completely disregarded her way of eating and ate heartily. She wolfed down everything as if it was her only meal. With the way Freya devoured her dish, none of the numerous maids at the Soul Sea realm in the hall dared to laugh at her. They didn't even have the nerve to look at her with a hint of despise in their eyes. Zen and Freya were both at the early stage of the Soul Sea realm. Their cultivation level was even lower than that of the dancing and singing ladies in the hall. However, the two of them were their leader's distinguished guests. Under these circumstances, who would be bold enough to show the slightest bit of contempt? Otherwise, they would be courting death. As for Zen, he didn't gobble his food as Freya did. After gaining admission at the 13 palaces, he now understood that from the time when he was a warrior at the Soul Sea realm, every step he advanced would not only depend on his talent but would also consume a large number of resources. What was placed before him at the feast was not the resources he deemed to consider as vital. Even the several 10th-grade sacred places would fall short in supplying the resources he needed. Zen, you had gone to the 13 palaces earlier, but why did you decide to come to our supreme world this time? Master Shen started to probe curiously. If I remember correctly, the distance between the Mist Palace and the Spirit Reading World is 1,320 supreme worlds. Zen had already guessed that Master Shen would not let him off easily with this question. With a faint smile, he responded, I can't possibly stay in the Mist Palace forever to cultivate. Even the warriors in the palace would have to go out to train. I just have an appointment with a friend in the Dark World. He felt that there was no need to hide his whereabouts, so he did not conceal anything. Freya, who was sitting beside him, was quite stunned as her eyelashes trembled. What did it mean that he had traveled across more than 1,000 supreme worlds? Chapter 1102. Let me serve you. All that Freya had known about the supreme worlds was from hearsays and stories. The upper world had always been described as a place so immense that one could only imagine its vastness. A normal warrior at the Soul Sea realm would have to expend all his life earnings in order to use a space channel that linked supreme worlds. Even simply traversing across the spiritual force sacred place would take a considerable amount of time. And yet here was Zen, a warrior who had traveled to a place which was more than 1,000 worlds away. Furthermore, he came back. It was truly an incredible feat. Freya had no knowledge of the 13 palaces that Master Shen had spoken of, but she seemed to have understood Zen's history bit by bit. He was an extraordinary warrior. What could be his reason for appearing in an ascending well? He had even mined with her. The contradictions were tangled threads that she failed to unravel. Zen had spoken freely, but Master Shen did not probe into his true intentions of this trip. At some point in their conversation, Master Shen steered into another direction. Turning to Freya, he asked, "Young lady, you are Julian's niece and had also ascended to our spiritual force sacred place. I wonder what your plans for the future are." Master Shen was a clever man. He could see that Freya and Zen got along quite well, but he had gleaned from his earlier conversation with Zen that he was simply passing by, and by chance had saved this woman. It was likely that Zen would not bring Freya along as he headed to the Dark World. Master Shen's question spoke of another implication. Knowing that Freya would not be traveling with Zen for long, he would be offering her a position in the sacred place. A faint smile crossed Zen's lips for a moment. Master Shen was indeed a person of wisdom. He remained silent as the older man waited for Freya's answer. Zen and Freya were acquaintances at best, and they had yet to be closer to consider each other friends. The question made Freya turn nervous. I don't know," she stammered. Her thoughts swirled wildly in her head as she considered the question. She had gone to her own uncle, but he had offered her nothing but disappointment. He offered her no assistance, and had even wanted to send her off to another man as a gift. Now that her uncle was dead, she had no direction. No clear answer came to her even as she pondered over the question. Master Shen's next words came as a surprise. "If you would like, I can help you enter the myriad spiritual force house of our spiritual force sacred place. It would give you a chance to hold the position of a city lord in the future. I can keep your uncle's position for you. What do you think?" he said with a smile. The myriad spiritual force house. A city lord. Freya's thoughts were all in a muddle. There had been no earlier indication from the older man that he would be offering her such a big opportunity. She gaped at him wordlessly for some moments before finally being able to respond. "Entering the myriad spiritual force house to cultivate and taking over my uncle's position." She felt as if her feet had left the ground and she was floating in the air. She was on cloud 9. How had she come across such wonderful fortune? None of this would have been possible if not for the man who was standing not far from her. Back then, Freya had persuaded Zen to go with her and visit her uncle. Now she felt like she was a fool. Zen looked at Freya, who appeared to be deep in thought. It was true that it would not be convenient for him to bring her to the Dark World. Danger awaited at every corner, and truthfully speaking, she would be of little help. Now that Master Shen took the initiative to propose such generous conditions, Zen thought that Freya would definitely accept. Freya's eyelashes trembled. There was an excited glint in her bright eyes, but its light disappeared the next moment. She cast her gaze downward and took a deep breath. "Master Shen, I'm sorry, but I cannot accept," she said, her voice firm with resolve. As these words left her mouth, Zen and Master Shen were both stunned. What Master Shen had just offered her was a great chance. They could find no reason for her not to agree. Recovering from his surprise, Master Shen proceeded to ask, "I wonder what the reason is behind your decision." Freya suddenly stood up and walked towards Zen, her eyes fixed on his steadily. She knelt down towards him and said, "Zen, you saved my life. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Please let me stay by your side and serve you." Her face was set in a serious expression. At this moment, Master Shen knew how terribly he had underestimated her. A look of pleasant surprise crossed his face as he secretly praised, "This girl is smart." She was able to figure out the parts of the situation the two men chose not to reveal and had pieced the puzzle on her own. The reason why Master Shen made such a generous offer was because of Zen. It was a perfectly good opportunity, but Freya herself knew that if she could stay at Zen's side, it would work more to her advantage in the long run. However, these thoughts were only half right. It was true that Freya wanted to stay at Zen's side because she knew that the benefit would be far greater. However, there was another more personal reason. She didn't know yet what exactly she wanted. Nevertheless, Zen had saved her life, and she had a debt to repay. She had nothing. No valuable possessions, no wealth, and even the few precious treasures in her space ring were unlikely to interest Zen. The only thing she had left was herself and her skills. After a moment's hesitation, she made this bold decision. This put Zen in a bit of a difficult position. Master Shen remained silent. He was curious what Zen would do next. Freya knelt in front of him with a resolute expression. She had a determined aura, her body taut with seriousness. After a brief moment of consideration, Zen reached a hand out to Freya and helped her up. Flashing her a small smile, he said, "Don't say such unnecessary things. I don't need a servant. If you want to follow me and risk your life, then you are free to do so." Zen had already been traveling far and long. He had no need for a servant, he was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. However, when he saw the determination in Freya's eyes, he couldn't find it in him to refuse. If they found themselves in a precarious position, he could just transport Freya inside the fairy palace for her safety. The mountain token in his possession would be a useful card in this gamble. Only then did a smile appear on Freya's face. She had her own doubts if she had made the right decision, but she had already steeled herself even in the lower world to face the dangers of the upper world straightforwardly. Otherwise, her ascent to the upper world would have all been for nothing. She would look unflinchingly even at death. A great world in the lower world was more than enough to accommodate a soul sea realm warrior like her. Countless creatures bowed their heads before her. She would always be a superior existence. Freya was nobody when she ascended to the upper world. Just like everyone else, she had to start at the very beginning. There was no place for fear and troubled thoughts after she had come this far. If she just wanted peace and stability, she would have stayed in the lower world. As of this time, Zen had been staying in Master Shen's palace for more than half a month. Throughout this time, he continued to cultivate diligently, not even sparing a moment to rest. Apart from cultivation, he was also still reflecting on the god's intimidating strike that he had just comprehended. The most profound aspect of the technique was still beyond him. Perhaps he would never be able to unleash that sword strike unless he abandoned all emotions. It was a task that demanded much, but Supreme Lord Sword had perfectly executed it. It was not that Zen overestimated himself and compared himself to a Supreme Lord. It was just that he already had a rough notion of the god's intimidating strike's secret. In the legends of the upper world, it was said that one could become a true god after abandoning his emotions. The very few Supreme Lords who were able to jump out of the heavens were the ones that could successfully sever ties to their mortal nature and lay claim to a true god's character. Only then would they have the qualifications to become true gods. Abandoning all of one's emotions was a feat that troubled even Supreme Lords. Like those who were cursing at each other with the roaring tokens, all of them possessed violent tempers, and this anger was the most difficult to subdue. Despite their unbelievable strength, this was the task of a lifetime. Even Supreme Lord Sword had yet to become a true god. However, the power of his sword strike would be enough to face a true god. Legend had it that he had once injured one. There was only one explanation for this. His god's intimidating strike had been executed in a completely emotionless state, but he was still unable to completely relinquish his emotions. Had he done so, he would have long since become a true god. Supreme Lord Sword must have used some other method as replacement, or perhaps he had found a way to reach a state when he was free of emotions. Zen pondered for a long time, thinking of what method Supreme Lord Sword had used. Chapter 1103, Secret Sect. For the past few days, Zen had been in deep thought. He didn't know much about Supreme Lord Sword, other than he was the owner of the Killing Sword Mountain. When Zen was still a nature creature, he had once stepped into the Killing Sword Mountain after comprehending the consummate sword intent. Now, he finally realized that the sword stabbed into the summit of the Killing Sword Mountain might belong to Supreme Lord Sword, and that it was also the white sword shadow in front of the huge stone. Zen wondered if one had to use the sword of Supreme Lord Sword to perform the god's intimidating strike. Zen immediately rejected this thought. The god's intimidating strike required a type of comprehension that matched that of a divinity. And those who could not display the strike perfectly were probably not in their right state of mind. If a warrior had completely comprehended the sword strike, then he would be able to unleash a terrifying power even if holding a blade made of grass in his hand. It was true that the 2-foot sword of Supreme Lord Sword was a powerful treasure, but, in the end, it could only be used to help a warrior perform the god's intimidating strike better. Zen couldn't stop thinking about these things. As for Freya, she had already packed up her stuff and planned to set off on their journey. Right now, we are in the spiritual force sacred place, Freya said as she poured her life vitality into a jade slip. In an instant, a giant map appeared around the two of them. This jade slip contained a 2-star divine texture and was able to draw a map within it. This display of the map was both intuitive and convenient. On this map, Freya carefully marked their current location, which was also the location of the Void Flower Hall. I've already learned about the entire spirit reading world and found out the location of the Dark World. We can pass through this space channel to get to the Supreme World channel, so that we can get there faster. Then, we can travel all the way north to the trans-border channel. Freya said seriously. Strictly speaking, the Dark World isn't the territory of the Alliance. In fact, although the Supreme World is very close to the Alliance, there are still many living creatures of all kinds and races gathered there. Besides the human beings, there are other powerful races, including the Demon Knight and the Ogres. Zen felt taken aback with Freya's words. Did you collect all this information in the past few days? Zen asked. Freya nodded, and then replied, it's not difficult to get information about these matters in the Void Flower Hall. I just asked around. She didn't know anything about these matters before. She didn't even know about which supreme worlds were next to the Spirit Reading World nor how many 10th grade sacred places the Spirit Reading World had. However, after Zen agreed to let her join him, she started to get prepared. It might have been difficult to gather information from any other city, but that was not the case in the Void Flower Hall. Zen was now starting to realize what a great idea it had been to agree to Freya joining him. Freya really took this matter seriously. She tried her best to obtain the related information and meticulously prepared for everything. After everything was prepared, Zen bid farewell to Master Shen. As the heavenly phoenix horse let out a loud screech, it carried Zen and Freya straight into the sky. Soon after, the two of them turned into a transmission channel and headed straight for the Supreme World Channel. The heavenly phoenix horse moved faster and faster, and it was capable of traveling a long distance. The time it took to cross a supreme world was longer than they imagined. Not long after, the two of them passed through a supreme world and decided to leave the transmission channel. They once again unfolded the map and compared it with their own position. The location that Lincoln had indicated seemed to be in the center of the Dark World. As Zen's finger pointed towards that place, Freya immediately said, in the center of the Dark World, there is a large city called Auspice City. This is a city of trade, also known as the 100 Races City because many races have established agencies here to trade with each other. The city is famous in the Alliance and there are many living creatures from over 100 races. It seemed that Freya was reciting every single word of the information she had gathered. Even though memorizing things was a basic skill for a warrior, with Freya's preparation being so thorough, it still made Zen a little stunned and surprised. The three most famous auction houses are controlled by the three great races. Noticing that Zen was staring at her, Freya stopped talking. She stuck out her tongue in embarrassment and said, "Let's get moving." Zen nodded, feeling a bit confused. He always assumed that the secret treasures of the Dark World would be at a deserted, remote place. However, now they were heading for a bustling city of trade. Why had Lincoln asked Zen to go there? Perhaps he was hoping to meet him there. No matter what, Zen decided to make his way to the Auspice City first. After traveling through the Supreme World Channel, they had finally reached their destination, the Auspice City, which was also known as the 100 Races City. Just as they left the transmission channel, several mountain-like living creatures appeared in front of them. They were tall and sturdy ogre warriors. Zen knew the ogre warriors quite well. When he stayed on the Sea God continent, Zen had fought this race many times. The ogre was a very aggressive race. Even in the upper world, they had become enemies of many other races. Their relationship with the human race was not good, and the two races would even fight disputes sometimes. However, the situation in the upper world was a bit more complicated. Not only did the human beings have an alliance, but there were also two other major human forces. The ogres were also divided into several forces and the relationship among the forces was very complicated. Although there was some friction between the races, Zen did not feel any enmity within this trade city. This wasn't the Sea God continent after all. On that chaotic continent, all the races were fighting for the right to survive and trying their best to suppress their opponents. The Dark World was originally very complicated, being a supreme world that contained so many races. But now, the purpose of everyone staying there was just to do business. They emphasized on making money through peaceful means, and there was no need for them to fight other races for no reason. Life didn't go as peacefully in other supreme worlds. For example, right now, human beings and ogres were fighting each other in other supreme worlds, killing each other to death. After entering the Auspice City, Zen forcefully stuffed the heavenly phoenix horse into the spirit beast bag. This was no longer humans' territory, so he had to be more careful. Even when he was on a territory belonging to the human race, there was someone like Julian who had still tried to kill him and take away his heavenly phoenix horse. If he were to ride the heavenly phoenix horse through the city, it would be too ostentatious and gather unwanted attention. Zen and Freya were traveling through Auspice City and moving towards the place that Lincoln designated. Just like the holy city of the spiritual force sacred place, many lines formed by the divine texture were also carved into the sky. All living beings flew along those lines in an orderly manner. After traveling for an hour, Zen and Freya landed on the ground. At this moment, a grand and imposing building appeared in front of them. It was a large circular building supported by hundreds of huge stone pillars. A special circular rune was drawn in front of the building. In front of this building, there were a lot of warriors going in and out. Most of them were human warriors. "What place is this?" Zen asked. Freya got flustered as she heard Zen's question. Although she had a thorough understanding of the dark world, it was impossible for her to understand everything about it in such a short amount of time. Moreover, this was only a single building in one of the large cities. There might be over 100 large cities in the dark world. Noticing Freya's panic, Zen couldn't help but laugh. Freya was serious all the time, and even though being serious was a virtue, there was no need to take his question so seriously. He was only asking casually. "It doesn't matter. I'll go ask around and figure out what it is," Zen said with a smile. Freya shook her head and uttered, "I will go then." However, at this time, a warrior wearing a long white robe walked up to them and said to Zen, "Hey, if you want to enter, I can show you in." Zen was immediately curious, but Freya asked, "What is this place?" The warrior spoke proudly, "This is the Luster Force secret sect. Have you heard about it?" Secret sect? Zen's eyes suddenly flashed as he remembered the Holy Maiden of the Divine Kingdom continent. Chapter 1104. The Second Sword Embryo. The man in white nodded. The Luster Force secret sect is the biggest secret sect of the human race. Do you have any interest in joining us? Freya stood beside Zen, the eyes beneath her thick lashes filled with curiosity. She was also an ascended warrior and did not know any better about the upper world than Zen. Previously, she had only gathered some information about Zen's destination and so was able to answer his questions. But she had never learned anything about secret sect and had no idea what it was about. At the man's invitation, Zen did not speak. The white-robed man did not force Zen to give him an answer. Instead, he invited Zen with utmost sincerity to follow him to the secret sect. Entering the grand and imposing building, Zen saw people everywhere. There were all kinds of people present. Most were ordinary without any cultivation. They ranged from old men to children less than 10 years old. At least 1 million people occupied the huge square. The people spread out in circles and knelt on the ground. They muttered something, bowing down before the center of the square. People closer to the inner circle had a higher level of cultivation. About a dozen Spirit Supreme Realm Masters were also present in the inner circle. The outer circle was basically filled with ordinary citizens. Zen's gaze finally landed on the center of the square. In the center was a round, transparent sphere. At the bottom of this sphere was a kind of light green liquid which took up 1/3 of the volume of the sphere. When Zen looked at the sphere, he felt a faint soul pressure exuding from it. However, the soul pressure did not have any malicious intent. Neither did it have any kind purpose. It was merely emitting pressure that did not cause any effect. What is it? Freya asked. The white-robed man suddenly spread out his hands and said with a trace of a fervent worship on his face, "This is what we believe in. It's our God, still in its embryonic stage. As long as everyone gives their most sincere love, our true God will gradually grow and reveal himself and deliver all living creatures from torment." These were words that he had perhaps repeated countless times, for he said them with great fluency. It was similar to the way Freya had repeated the names of places on the map before. However, every glance and every action of the white-robed man complemented his words, and unknowingly, a listener could well be convinced and brainwashed. This method might work on mortals and even some martial artists with weak warrior spirits. However, Zen did not feel anything, and even Freya's face revealed disapproval. At this moment, Lavender's voice came to his ears. What he said sounded sanctified, but it's just for the sake of collecting the faith energy. The Supreme Lord of Original Sin has spent 100,000 years and used the faith energy of 1 trillion living creatures to hatch a sword embryo. This sword is now ranked second on the Universe Spirit Tablet. They are not satisfied and seem to use the old trick in hopes of hatching another sword embryo. Hearing Lavender's words, Zen suddenly remembered that Brianna had mentioned this to him before. In other words, the transparent sphere in the middle of the square is in fact a sword embryo. Zen asked Lavender silently. Lavender shook her head and said, "This isn't a sword embryo. This is just a container for collecting the faith energy. The light green liquid inside is the faith energy they have accumulated over the years." Hearing what Lavender said, Zen concluded that there were perhaps countless divisions of the Luster Force secret sect in the upper world. The one here was merely one of its branches. The Luster Force secret sect gathered as many followers as they could to condense a sword embryo, so that they could obtain a super weapon which held immense power. It was indeed a brilliant idea. Although there was no emotion on Zen's face, the white-robed man continued to endlessly preach the power of the Luster Force secret sect, as well as the benefits of joining them. However, at this moment, Zen suddenly felt his spirit beast bag move. The space inside the spirit beast bag was not small by any means. Even if both the heavenly phoenix horse and the ancestral dragon stayed together in the spirit beast bag, it should not be crowded in the slightest. What was the little dragon doing inside? Zen released a strand of his perception into space to investigate what was happening in the bag. He discovered that the ancestral dragon was knocking on the walls of the spirit beast bag, as if wanting to escape it. Its movements were savage as its small head hit the edges of the space within the bag. As for the heavenly phoenix horse, it seemed afraid of the ancestral dragon and kept a certain distance from it. At the same time, it stared vigilantly at the mad creature. "Be quiet, now is not the time to come out." Zen tried to pacify the ancestral dragon. Although the dragon was born not long ago, it was still quite obedient. After all, in the heart of the dragon, Zen was his mother. But today, the ancestral dragon did not listen to Zen. It kept knocking around the spirit beast bag. At this moment, the cyan dragon said indifferently, "The ancestor dragon has found its food." Food? Zen was stunned to hear this. What does it eat? He did not know what the ancestral dragon liked to eat. In the past, it seemed to especially like eating what Margaret cooked. Besides that, it did not seem to need food at all. Zen had asked the cyan dragon about this before. He had asked whether the little fellow needed to devour the law power to grow. But the cyan dragon did not give Zen a clear answer. He only told Zen that the ancestral dragon indeed had its food, but it was impossible for Zen to obtain such food in a short period of time, so Zen dropped the matter altogether. Anyway, it seemed like the little dragon could not starve even if it did not eat. And now the cyan dragon was saying that the ancestral dragon had discovered its food. According to what Brianna had said, the ancestral dragon was also a faith totem. Zen followed this line of thought, and as his mind raced, he realized something. Could it be that its food is the faith energy? Ha, you got it right. Only by devouring the faith energy will the ancestral dragon truly grow, the cyan dragon answered and nodded. Zen finally understood why the ancestral dragon was reacting this way upon entering the secret sect. It turned out that the faith energy was the food it had needed all along. But I can't just let this little dragon devour the faith energy right now. Zen looked helpless. For a shrine of the Luster Force secret sect, there was no way that powerful people did not guard it. As far as Zen could see, quite a few powerful masters were among the millions of fanatics in front of them. There were several Spirit Supreme Realm masters in the inner circle. Surely even more powerful beings were in the secret sect to back up if something happened here. The cyan dragon said in reply, "In truth, with the current strength of the ancestral dragon, it is impossible for any normal martial artist to injure it. If you let it out, it will find its own way to obtain the faith energy." Presently, the power of the ancestral dragon could not be considered very noteworthy. However, it had the talent of being immune to all original laws. It would be next to impossible for anyone to hurt it or try to capture it using uncommon tricks. However, Zen could not release an ancestral dragon in the midst of so many people, just so it could devour the faith energy. The faith energy in the sphere had accumulated over an unfathomable number of years, and it was still not much. Realizing that the sphere would not be taken away anytime soon, Zen knew that he needed to think carefully and work out a good plan if he wanted to help the ancestral dragon consume the faith energy. At the very least, he should observe first and find an opportunity later. Thinking of this, Zen prepared to leave. However, the white-robed martial artist who had been preaching all this time shifted, suddenly aware that Zen was about to leave with Freya. He instantly stood before Zen and tried to maintain an amiable manner as he asked, "Friend, now that you have visited our Luster Force secret sect, why don't you join us? If you join, you will get benefits you cannot imagine." Zen replied faintly, "I do not need any benefits. Friend, having faith can purify your heart and mind. This will be good for you," the white-robed martial artist insisted with a smile. "I don't require any benefits, haven't I made myself clear?" Zen looked indifferently at the man. Unexpectedly, the white-robed warrior then said, "All living beings in Auspice City understand that one has only two choices after entering the shrine of our Luster Force secret sect. You can be carried out of this place dead, or you can kneel before the square you see. Those members of Demon Knight who worshipped their queens also ended up joining our Luster Force secret sect." After he finished speaking, he pointed to an area in the square, where Zen spotted a few members of the Demon Knight. Chapter 1105, Stealing the Faith Energy. The piety of the Demon Knight in their faith was something Zen was well aware of. To the entire Demon Knight, their only faith consisted of the three queens, Lavender, Elena, and the last queen. Regardless of whether it was in the upper world or lower world, in any sacred place of the Demon Knight race, their faith remained the same. Such a thing couldn't easily be changed in a person, after all. The moment the members of the Demon Knight were born, they underwent the baptism of the queens, statues, engraving their fealty into their bones. The Luster Force secret sect recruited a few of the Demon Knight race members into their sect, most likely because they had some special means to make the latter obey. Seeing Zen's solemn expression, the white-robed martial artist's smile slowly faded. "Do you need me to spell it out? It seems as though I can't refuse," Zen suddenly commented with a smile. The other man seemed pleased upon hearing this as he said, "You're a smart boy. I believe you can become a good believer. The gods will definitely protect." "No, I won't join you." Before the man could finish his statement, Zen interjected. The man's expression froze and his gaze upon Zen turned cold. "Do you know what it means to refuse?" "I don't know." A faint smile surfaced on Zen's face. "But I don't want to waste time creating a sword embryo for some supreme lord." It was no secret that the Luster Force secret sect was making a sword embryo. Only the highest of figures in the upper world were made aware of it, but in the name of goodness, the Luster Force secret sect still managed to gather a remarkable number of believers. In the eyes of many, after all, a supreme lord was hardly different from a god. With that, Zen's straightforward words were deemed blasphemous. The face of the white-robed martial artist darkened as the corners of his mouth curled up into an icy smile. With a gentle wave of his hand, he triggered several rays of light to shoot out from the upper floor of the shrine. Several warriors clad in golden armor could be seen in each ray. "Capture the man who slandered our god. We're going to burn him to death with hellfire." With that, the white-robed martial artist commanded the warriors to seize Zen. But Zen seemed rather down. They had merely stepped inside to take a look around, but escaping turned out to be such an ordeal. What kind of cursed place was this? In a flash of green light, the 5-foot-long sword appeared in his hand. Then, nether god shadows shot out from the sword edge, rushing toward the golden-armored warriors from all directions. The golden-armored warriors stood only at the life and death realm, and their strength seemed ordinary. With the nether god shadow's strength, Zen had no trouble dealing with a warrior who had just entered the Soul Sea realm. As for the life and death realm martial artists, the nether god shadows were enough to finish them off. But Zen felt no hatred for them. He had only just entered the Auspice City. It would be dishonorable to randomly take an innocent's life. But he needed to subdue them. Much to Zen's surprise, beams of light green light emitted from the body of the warriors and they seemed to block all the attacks from the nether god shadows. They were left completely unharmed. "What's going on?" The surprise was evident on his face, but he didn't hesitate in the slightest. Realizing that they shouldn't linger there any longer, he grabbed Freya and dragged her away. "Let's go." "You won't be able to escape," the white-robed man warned coldly. Several of the golden-armored warriors rushed to surround Zen where he stood. Over 100 life and death realm martial artists were mobilized. But as he watched the warriors charge toward him, Zen merely sneered. In a casual swing of the long sword in his hand, an arc-shaped beam of light spread out. Bang, bang, bang. With one strike, Zen managed to knock down a huge group of warriors. Still, the green light emanating from their bodies seemed to protect them effectively against his sword light. Could the green light really be that strong? The warriors who had been knocked down simply got up once again and rushed toward him like it was nothing. Meanwhile, a chilling light flickered in Freya's body. She had to deal with the pincer attack coming from the many golden-armored warriors. Boom, boom, boom. Even after Zen knocked them out again, they seemed to have the endurance of a cockroach. They couldn't be killed. At this moment, 4 particularly nimble golden-armored warriors approached Zen. 2 of them locked onto his arms while the other 2 grabbed his legs. Locked in the dogfight, Zen grew terribly impatient. Killing intent seemed to grow in his pupils. "Get away." As the power of the dragon scale surged forth, his body trembled as he sent the 4 warriors flying. The powerful force penetrated right through the green light, shattering the warriors' guts, the impact enough to make them spit blood. Initially, Zen only planned to intimidate the warriors. Never would he have thought that the other warriors wouldn't get the signal. They continued flocking over with fervent gazes. The group came like a golden ocean, designed specifically to drown Zen. Such fellows seemed to have lost their minds. Fear of death did not exist within them. At that moment, Zen confirmed that he couldn't stay there any longer. As he thought it, he showed no mercy as the power in his body soared once again. Like a raging bull, he raced away. Waves of air currents seemed to gush out from his body, blasting away all the golden-armored warriors who dared to approach Zen's body. As for Freya, her figure seemed to flash as she followed closely behind Zen, dashing all the way out of the shrine. Just as Zen finally stepped out the shrine's entrance, surprise flashed in him. All the warriors seemed to stop mid-motion, having no intent to chase him any further. Instead, they froze and stared blankly at Zen. The whole scene left a strange taste in Zen's mouth. It seemed as though the warriors could fight only within the shrine. The white-robed martial artist strode to the front of the shrine. Wearing a courteous smile he said, "Join our Luster Force secret sect and you won't regret it. You can make a decision now, while it's not too late." Zen only smiled and shrugged in response. "All I'm sure about is how much I don't want to join you." "I won't regret it, you will." "What do you mean?" the man asked curiously. With that, Zen only shrugged in return and left the area with Freya. Those secret sects didn't dare go overboard in the Auspice City. After taking Freya out of the shrine, the others didn't follow. But Zen wouldn't let the matter end so easily. In the evening, Zen brought Freya back to an area beside the shrine. "What are you doing back here?" she asked, puzzled. The golden-armored warriors seemed to leave a rather deep impression on her. They were like puppets as they went all out in their attacks, not seeming to have a lick of concern for their own lives. Given the scene earlier, she assumed they had slave seals or had been controlled by some other special means. Anyway, she had no intention of joining the secret sect and turning into a puppet. "There's a little guy who is hungry," was all Zen said in return. Freya seemed puzzled until she saw him pull out the small ancestral dragon from his spirit beast bag. The little dragon made some gurgling noises before tilting his head toward the shrine. It was clear that he had smelt food. He began struggling, trying to free himself from Zen's grip. What is this?" Freya asked, still puzzled. It was no surprise that she didn't know what the animal was. The dragon was still too young and looked nothing like a genuine dragon. Without answering her question, he said to the dragon, "Go. But you must be careful." With that, he released his grip on the creature and the dragon sank into the ground in an instant, disappearing from their view. Because Zen didn't answer, Freya decided not to ask any further. It was Zen who did so, and he must have had his reasons. Inside the massive square inside the shrine, every believer was busy mumbling to themselves as they fell prostrate on the surface, offering their faith energy. What they had yet to realize was that the tiny ancestral dragon was rapidly moving underground, approaching the center of the square. When it felt its food above it, it changed course and carefully slithered into the stone pillar above its head. The pillar was just the one holding up the sphere. Chapter 1106, Previous Subordinates. Over 1 million people crawled through the area, tirelessly offering their faith energy. Even after spending a year, they were only able to form a sliver of it. Only a third of the sphere was filled with the faith energy, which was offered by millions of people praying day and night. The ancestral dragon was now hidden behind the stone pillar, moving upward. After some time, it arrived at the top of the pillar where a convenient, spherical-shaped container held the faith energy. It was a unique divine weapon that could contain faith energy, but that was nothing to the ancestral dragon. It simply opened its mouth wide and bit into it. Crack! A crisp sound resounded from the middle of the plaza. The ancestral dragon bit into the bottom of the container, leaving a hole in the surface. The green faith energy easily poured into its mouth. All the creatures on the plaza raised their heads, stunned speechless. All of them were kowtowing with sincerity, completely ignoring the outside world. When Zen had fought the golden-armored warriors, no one was even curious enough to take a look at them. In their eyes, any distraction would mean them desecrating their god. But now, their god embryo was broken. All the believers were stunned in silence. Their god represented everything to them. How could their god embryo possibly be broken? Soon after, everyone heard the sound of huge gulps of water being swallowed, the faith energy in the container visibly decreasing. "What is that? Someone is stealing our faith energy." Just what is that thing? All the corners on the square were thrown into a mess. To all the believers, the outside world was of no importance, only their own faith mattered. The green liquid in the sphere was proof of that faith. Over 1 million people spent years in there to form the liquid, and it almost hurt how easily it was swallowed up in the blink of an eye. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It wasn't only the believers. The other powerful warriors within the shrine were also startled speechless. Several white-robed warriors flew out from the depths of the shrine and took a look at the container before their expressions filled with exasperation. The faith energy they had painstakingly accumulated for years upon years just disappeared in an instant. In truth, the Luster Force secret sect wasn't particularly heavily guarded. Although the faith energy was a precious resource, no warrior would try to steal it. It was essentially useless to regular warriors. Soon, the believers began to chase after a strangely shaped creature. Various kinds of law powers rumbled inside, but even the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't even cause the slightest harm to the ancestral dragon. As this tiny dragon circled around, its face revealed a trace of satisfaction. Of course, the creature was utterly satisfied after swallowing up all the faith energy. "What's going on?" Freya asked Zen after hearing the huge commotion. With a smile, Zen shrugged. "Maybe someone went crazy. I wonder if the god they believe in will give them comfort." The uproar lasted for quite a while before gradually coming to a halt. Suddenly, a small crack surfaced under Zen's feet before the small body of the ancestral dragon slithered back up and leapt into Zen's embrace. Caw. After devouring the faith energy, the ancestral dragon seemed to be in a pleasant mood. News about the stolen faith energy in the Luster Force secret sect had spread like wildfire. There were many secret sects in Auspice City, as the human race had already assigned different sects to take in believers of different sorts and accumulate faith energy. While the faith energy was useless to ordinary warriors, after a certain amount of faith energy was accumulated, it could be made to refine peerless weapons. Because of this, apart from the Demon Knight, other races used all sorts of methods to gather faith energy. When the other secret sects heard the news, they easily took pleasure in the Luster Force secret sect's misfortune. But in the next moment, all the faith energy in Auspice City was robbed by the ancestral dragon. In order to deal with the creature, two of the secret sects hid their faith energy in an especially remote place, sending dozens of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors to watch over the faith energy. But they still couldn't avoid the ancestral dragon's uniquely strong sense of smell. During this period, Zen spent some Supreme Life Vitality crystals to purchase a mansion in the city and stayed there for some time. After the ancestral dragon devoured a satisfying amount of faith energy, the little guy easily fell back into a deep sleep. No matter what Zen did, the creature didn't budge. It was as limp as a snake in hibernation. The Cyan dragon told Zen that after the ancestral dragon accumulated enough faith energy, it could complete its first evolution, after which, it should look more like a fully fledged dragon instead of its current seahorse-like shape. After a few days, Freya returned from her travel. She had spent the past few days helping Zen gather information about the Demon Knight. There weren't many Demon Knight members in Auspice City. After all, the race wasn't good at dealing with other kinds. But if one race wanted to survive in a supreme world, it was inevitable to trade with other races. In the Dark World, there's a 10th grade sacred place belonging to the Demon Knight called the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place. But it has less than 100,000 Demon Knight members dispatched to Auspice City. Most of them stay in the north of the city, Freya explained. Of course, it was Zen who had asked Freya to collect information. He had promised Lavender he would help her return to the throne, after all. Lavender's plan consisted of investing a large amount of resources on Zen to help him cultivate and gathering her previous subordinates. But Zen had a special roaring token. In the past, so long as Lavender used the token to gather her previous subordinates, the Demon Knight members in the entire universe would have listened to her. Even now, although the number of Demon Knight members willing to follow Lavender wasn't large by any means, it was still not too small either. But it would still be difficult to gather them openly through the roaring token. Doing it in private was their best choice for the time being. After analyzing the information Freya had provided, Zen left her to take care of the mansion and rushed to the northern part of Auspice City by himself. As Zen headed north, the number of Demon Knight members along his way increased. The surrounding architecture seemed to shift into something else entirely different from the rest of Auspice City. The places where ogres lived were rather rough. They liked using blood-red iron flame rocks to construct buildings. Inside the black bricks, faint red flames seemed to flow, giving onlookers a feeling of vigor. Meanwhile, humans' architecture stood very neat, horizontal and vertical, and well organized. But the north of the city, the gathering place of many Demon Knight members, was made up of massive forests. The roads narrowed into the ground, and even the roots of plants could easily make one stumble over them. If any other race were to enter the place, it would probably be deemed troublesome. But for Demon Knight members who lived on the holy trees since birth, it was no issue. But the other races wouldn't simply rashly barge into the Demon Knight's gathering place. Naturally, Zen's sudden arrival earned many surprised gazes from the Demon Knight members. It was a rather good thing that Zen had Lavender as a guide. Under her instruction, he found the central area of the settlement. It was a huge tree with a height of 1,000 feet. The area was not a sacred place of the Demon Knight, so it was naturally impossible for a holy tree to have been settled there. But the appearance of such a massive tree in Auspice City made people rack their brains for an explanation. Just as Zen approached, 2 Demon Knight members stood in his way. One of them gripped a long spear in her hand as she pointed it at his chest. "Halt, human! What brought you here? Is there someone you were looking for?" the other woman asked. Only a few number of humans had visited the Demon Knight's gathering area. And when they did, it was only for business. The Demon Knight had a specific group of warriors responsible for dealing with the other races. Chapter 1107, Destroy the Statues. The long spear before Zen emitted a sharp cold glow. Nonetheless, his face remained void of any emotions. Facing the questions asked by the Demon Knight women, he reached for the tip of the spear and gently pinched it. He then smiled and said, "I'm not looking for anyone." The Demon Knight women didn't attack. In a normal situation, all they would do was drive away those warriors from other races that were barging in. They were sent here by the sacred place to trade with other races after all. It wouldn't be good for their sacred place if they just randomly killed creatures from other races. "If you are not looking for anyone, then leave," she warned while looking at Zen. She felt rather strange that he didn't look nervous at all. They had thought that Zen would obediently leave after hearing their warning. However, they had never expected the man to push the spear away from him instead and utter, "I'm not looking for anyone, but I'm not leaving either." "Then you are looking for death." This was the center of the Demon Knight's residential area. These women were the guards here. Thus, they couldn't allow Zen to just cause any trouble. The Demon Knight woman thrust forward as soon as her voice faded. She was at the Soul Sea realm and was holding the spear with both hands. Her attack was actually very powerful. Nonetheless, her spear only managed to move forward 3 inches and couldn't go any further than that. Zen smiled as he pinched the tip of the spear. Disbelief flooded the Demon Knight woman's eyes. She never thought that this human warrior before her could seal off her spear with just 2 fingers. Unwilling to give up, she used all her might to pull her weapon away. However, her spear remained motionless. This situation was only possible if the strength between her and the human was almost equal. Whoosh, whoosh, 2 Demon Knight women who were standing by also joined the battle when they saw their friend at a disadvantage. They pounced over from above Zen's head. But then he abruptly released the spear, took a step forward, and charged towards the tree. "Stop him," one of the Demon Knight women shouted. Facing the fierce attack from behind, Zen simply waved his hand and sent the 2 weapons flying away. Although Zen's expression was indifferent, his gaze was grave. This was because Lavender had reminded him more than once that this was the first and most important step in helping her take revenge. Boom! A loud sound echoed out. The door at the bottom of the big tree was directly smashed into pieces by Zen's body. Wood chips fell to the ground, and the sound alarmed all the warriors of the Demon Knight. "Someone is trespassing. Intercept this person. Just kill him." This tree was called the Ginkgo Pavilion by the Demon Knight members. It was a branch of the purple bamboo sacred place set up in Auspice City. Zen's charge was similar to poking a hornet's nest. However, many members of the Demon Knight were also puzzled. Does this human have nothing better to do than to barge into the Ginkgo Pavilion? What on earth is he even doing here? They couldn't figure out any justifiable answer for Zen's acts. Warriors at the Soul Sea realm and Spirit Supreme realm all surrounded him as they all thought of taking the human down. 3 emerald green arrows shot towards Zen in an instant. But he just smiled and stepped aside, easily dodging all of them. His body movement skills were superb. After he had just dodged the arrows, he came face to face with a broadsword as tall as a man, hacking down towards him. It was clear to Zen that fighting with so many Demon Knight warriors would only stop him from reaching his destination. Thus, with a flip of his body, he dodged the large blade before him. His speed was extreme. In the blink of an eye, he reached the 2nd floor. Almost all warriors of the Demon Knight were good at speed and were extremely agile. However, they all appeared like helpless puppies compared to Zen. He was continually shifting left and right, rolling up and down, and unexpectedly dodging attacks from 6 or 7 Demon Knight women at the Spirit Supreme realm. 3rd floor, 4th floor. In almost a single breath, Zen had already charged to the top floor of the Ginkgo Pavilion. That was when a soft sigh aired through the place. "Stop!" A faint pink figure suddenly appeared behind Zen. Both of her legs were placed together in the air, and her eyes were filled with coldness. This woman's strength obviously surpassed the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors by far. Although he felt the pressure from the woman, Zen continued to rush forward to the three queen statues. When she saw that Zen did not listen to her, the woman laughed coldly and pointed two of her fingers towards him, sending out a flying shuttle from her sleeve. The tail of the flying shuttle was tied with a dark cyan chain. It shot out for less than a foot before disappearing. Immediately, it passed through space, and in the blink of an eye, it was already hanging on Zen's legs. The moment Zen was bound, he immediately felt an enormous, formless force firmly binding him in place. Even so, the Thunder Wind Divine Sword in Zen's hand instantly thrust forward. From within it, 6 or 7 nether god shadows shot out and headed straight for the queen's statues. "You're courting death." The pink-clothed woman's face immediately showed anger. She didn't plan to kill Zen. She just wanted to punish the one who trespassed into the ginkgo pavilion. However, a sudden trace of doubt sprang in her heart. What was Zen's reason for breaking into the ginkgo pavilion in the first place? The ginkgo pavilion was merely the core of the gathering place of the Demon Knight members. It didn't have any great treasures or secrets in it at all. It couldn't be that he was just crazy. Nonetheless, it didn't take a minute more before she understood what this human brat was after. He was actually trying to destroy their queen's statues. Wherever there were Demon Knight members, there were also queen's statues. They would still build the queen's statues even in non-sacred places. With the Demon Knight members that were stationed in Auspice City, this place was equivalent to a 6th-grade sect. They had built these 3 queen's statues on the very first day they had entered Auspice City. The statues were their totem of faith. They weren't precious, but they were important to the Demon Knight warriors. Why was this brat trying to destroy them? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The pink-clothed woman gently raised her wrist, and another flying shuttle suddenly flew across space. Following this, it charged towards the nether god shadows. Plop, plop, plop. The nether god shadows easily shattered by the flying shuttle one after another. However, Zen's movements just now were too fast. Moreover, he released 7 nether god shadows at the same time. The flying shuttle continued to move forward but still failed to destroy 2 nether god shadows. Clank, clank. 2 queen's statues were instantly smashed to smithereens. The statues of Queen of Life and Queen of Punishment were destroyed. The pink-clothed woman's expression went even darker and madder. Her originally indifferent eyes were now filled with a want to kill. Any Demon Knight member would defend their queens, and breaking their queen's statues was the greatest blasphemy to their queens. Kill him, kill him. How dare he destroy the queen's statues? Death penalty. The warriors at the bottom of the tree also followed behind. Their eyes were flooding with rage as they saw fragments of the statues flew all over the place. The pink-dressed woman did not hesitate any longer and released 2 formidable flying shuttles to attack Zen. 2 blue-colored lightning balls engulfed the shuttle's surface. The balls of lightning were only the size of a fist, but the power contained within them made Zen's heart jump with fear. I'm afraid that the Thunder Law has already reached the 5th layer. Lavender, if you don't come out and help me now, I'll be in trouble. Zen calmly said. As soon as his voice fell, a blood-red shadow shot out from Zen's body. The moment that figure condensed into existence, the cold plum blood spear in his space ring shot out too and was caught by that figure. Clank, clank. With 2 crisp sounds, the 2 flying shuttles with terrifying balls of lightning were easily brushed aside by the figure. Upon seeing this, the pink-clothed woman, who was in the lead, furrowed her eyebrows and became even more furious than before. However, her expression drastically changed when she recognized the figure that had appeared next to Zen. Chapter 1108. The First Step. Every member of the Demon Knight race knew very well what Lavender looked like and what she smelled like. To some extent, they were even more familiar with her than with their parents. From the moment they were born, they would be baptized in front of the Queen's statues. The Queen of Life could make their life energy grow stronger, the Queen of Punishment could make them observe the laws of the Demon Knight race, and the Queen of Killings could boost their courage, making them understand the killing way. At this moment, although Lavender was now only a sword spirit, her soul force had already recovered 60%. The cold plum blood spear in her hand exuded a majestic aura. As the Demon Knight martial artists of the Ginkgo Pavilion witnessed this, their hearts suddenly trembled. They realized that their queen had actually arrived. The Dark World was a remote area where many races gathered. The whole Supreme World was mainly a place for trading. Although the human race, Demon Knight, and Ogre race all had a 10th grade sacred place here, among the various races, they were still considered relatively weak forces. Therefore, when these warriors of the Demon Knight saw the sudden appearance of their queen, they were all stunned. To them, the personal visit of any queen here was an unparalleled honor. In the hearts of the members of the demon knight race, a queen was even more important than a supreme lord. Thump, thump, all of the demon knight members knelt down right away to honor their queen, Lavender. Floating high up in the air, Lavender looked down at her subjects. Her gaze finally landed on the woman in pink. "What's your name?" "My queen, you can call me Neela," the woman in pink answered sincerely. In fact, a few months ago, all the members of the Demon Knight knew that their Queen of Killings had returned to the upper world, and that she had a conflict with the Queen of Punishment. At that time, Lavender had used Zen's roaring token to quarrel with the Queen of Punishment. Not just the Demon Knight race, everyone knew about this. After all, this was an internal conflict within the Demon Knight race. Some of the races that hated the Demon Knight race was expecting to watch a good show. After all, the return of Lavender would definitely cause an internal strife within the Demon Knight race. Lavender coldly nodded, and then continued, "Neela, I want all of you to make an oath of allegiance to me, in front of the statue." Upon hearing this, Neela and her other subordinates uneasily raised their heads, discomfort evident on their faces. The task Lavender was asking them to do was extremely difficult. Actually, they had the same concern as the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place did back then. Even though Lavender was their queen, she was only one of their queens, as the Demon Knight race did not only have one queen. For so many years, the three queens had been advancing and retreating together. Each of them performed their respective positions and led the huge Demon Knight race. But once they made an oath, it was equivalent to breaking away from the protection of the other two queens and becoming loyal to only one of the three queens. Back then, Amber didn't have to decide. At that time, Lavender did not force the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place to choose, because a sacred place in the lower world would not be of much help to her and it wouldn't really change anything. But it was different now. Lavender and Elena had already declared war against each other. From that moment, she decided she would take her own power back and eventually return to the throne. So before she came here, Lavender had only asked Zen to do one thing. No matter what kind of masters he faced, he only had one goal in mind when he charged into the Ginkgo Pavilion, and that was to destroy the statues of the other two queens. Any Demon Knight tribe would have the queens' statues at their place. The reason for this was so that the queens of the Demon Knight could observe what was happening in every tribe through the statues. They could also communicate with any of the sacred places. Even though there was a small chance that Elena would be watching, Lavender still asked Zen to smash the statues the moment they arrived for good measure. Seeing the anxiety on Nella's and the others' faces, Lavender laughed coldly. "Is it really that difficult to make you swear an oath to your queen? Or do you think that the Queen of Killings is no longer worthy of your trust?" Upon hearing this, they became even more panicked. The three queens were very different from one another. When the Demon Knight members faced the Queen of Life, they felt boundless vitality. When it came to the Queen of Punishment, they were reverent, but truthfully, the majority of them liked the Queen of Killings the most. When facing the Queen of Killings, they could feel the endless killing intent. It was able to awaken the courage deep in their souls, allowing them to be even braver and more skillful in battles. But right now, the Queen of Killings' power had collapsed. The old members that had followed the Queen of Killings had either died or lived in seclusion. Under such circumstances, choosing to stand by Lavender's side was definitely not a wise choice. If they chose her and this spread out, Lavender could instantly be exterminated by Elena and they would definitely be implicated. Elena was the queen in charge of the punishment, and also the cruelest queen of her kind. If they were to be implicated, the entire Demon Knight of the Dark World would have to die with Lavender. Zen sat on a railing in the Ginkgo Pavilion. Even though his face was blank, he was feeling nervous on the inside. He promised that he would help Lavender return to the throne, and it was something he needed to do. It didn't matter when he did it as long as he did it. What they were doing now was the first step to get Lavender back to her throne. But it was still a little difficult for them to decide right now. If they were to refuse to take the oath, it might cause trouble. Lavender's whereabouts would be exposed, and Zen's whereabouts would be exposed as well. With Zen's current strength, he had no power to resist the Queen of Punishment. For Zen and Lavender, this was an adventure, but one that they had to take no matter what. Lavender's face looked extremely solemn while the faint soul pressure released from her contained an aura of supreme majesty. As the pressure came down, even the face of Neela turned deathly pale. For them, it was an extremely difficult decision to make, but every member of Demon Knight present knew that this was something they couldn't avoid. The conflict between the two queens had long reached a point where they could not tolerate each other anymore, so naturally only one of them would be staying. Lavender didn't say anything else. If her efforts to come here herself to get the support of her subjects was wasted, then she would never be able to return to the throne. Time ticked by. After 5 minutes, Nella's eyes glistened with determination as she raised her head and swore, "My queen is the glory, and the glory is my life. With eternal killing, to guard the territory of our race." After Neela took the lead to take the oath, the other demon knight martial artists also followed her and began making their oaths. As they swore the oath, the only remaining statue, Queen of Killings, glowed with a faint red light. With her eyes gleaming, Lavender listened attentively to their oaths. The oath of the Ginkgo Pavilion was the first step for Lavender's return to the throne. After everyone made their vows, Lavender said lightly, "You can all stand up now." Neela nodded and led the many warriors of the demon knight to their feet. Since she had made a vow to the queen, it meant that from now on she would only serve Lavender as her queen. However, to them, this was still a supreme honor. Every day, they would worship the queen's statues, but most of them would never be able to see their queens for their whole life. Now that Lavender had come here personally, how could they reject her? Although it was a painful choice for them to give up on the other two queens, it was still a great opportunity for them to grow. Once Lavender returned to the throne, they would definitely be valued for their support and loyalty. "My queen, what can I do for you?" Neela asked as she rose. Lavender coming here definitely meant that there were very important things to be accomplished. Otherwise, she wouldn't have taken the initiative to come here herself. Lavender said simply, "I want you to head to the Eternal Night World to find someone and give this jade slip to her." As Lavender spoke, Zen, who was by her side, took out a jade slip. It was a jade slip that had been created beforehand and contained extremely important information. Eternal Night World. Neela raised her eyebrows. She also knew that the Eternal Night World was the supreme world where the Queen of Killings used to live. Since the Queen of Killings disappeared, the entire Eternal Night World was taken over by the Queen of Punishment. However, since she had already taken an oath of allegiance to the Queen of Killings, Lavender's orders were not to be disobeyed. She had no reason to refuse even if she was asked to go to a mountain of swords and a sea of flames. Chapter 1109. Try it out. Before heading to the Ginkgo Pavilion, Lavender had thoroughly considered the pros and cons of her journey. With the authority and confidence she possessed, it was sure that this 10th grade sacred place in the dark world would submit to her and her alone. But subduing a 10th grade sacred place was practically meaningless to her, and it was in fact dangerous. It would help her very little in her fight against Elena and would alert the enemy too. All of her activities would have to be done in secret. The fewer people knew about it, the better. The Ginkgo Pavilion had been set up in Auspis City by the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place. It was basically a trade hub that spent much time trading with the other forces in Auspis City, which meant it always had a rich collection of treasures and abundant resources at hand. After taking a look at the resources they had, Lavender merely shook her head. None of them had caught her eye. After all, the Dark World was just a small place at the outskirts of the upper world, and was nothing when compared to the Mist Palace. These resources might have been extremely precious to some ordinary warriors, but they were of no use to Lavender or Zen. She was far more concerned about the secret treasures of the Dark World. In any case, although the resources and treasures that lay there did not catch her eyes, she did pick up quite a lot of life vitality jades. Every year, when the Ginkgo Pavilion traded with the other races, they turned over the life vitality jades to the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place, which meant that there was an abundance of them in here. To not arouse suspicion at the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place and protect Neela, who was in charge of handing over all the life vitality jades to the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place, Lavender only took about 1/5 of them. Even then, the number of life vitality jades she collected was close to 30,000. Zen no longer needed life vitality jades because of the enormous changes that had happened inside his body. However, the more money and treasures one had, the better. It might come in handy someday. Previously, Zen had risked his life to gather about 100 life vitality jades. To any warrior of the Soul Sea realm, these 30,000 life vitality jades were no less than an enormous fortune. After staying in the Ginkgo Pavilion for 2 days, Neela resigned from her post in the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place. Then she found an excuse to leave and set out to the Eternal Night World with the jade slip that Lavender had given her. At the same time, Zen quietly returned to his residence in Auspis City, waiting for the arrival of Lincoln. Some months earlier, Lincoln and Zen had agreed to meet each other in half a year. In the blink of an eye, time had gone by and now, only some 40 days or so were left till the day they were supposed to meet. Zen was actually worried whether Lincoln would arrive here at the scheduled time or not. 1.5 months later, Zen was still immersed in his cultivation. After breaking through to the Soul Sea realm, his cultivation had increased and his strength had improved greatly. He had also been comprehending higher levels of the different law powers in the stellar body in an orderly manner. Very occasionally, he would find himself able to communicate with several stars. Perhaps it was because he had absorbed the luck-devouring snakes that his luck seemed to have increased now. In fact, when Zen had just absorbed the luck-devouring snakes on Willow Island, his luck had, for the moment, risen greatly. For some time, he had become the favored one of the entire world, with his luck reaching a point where almost all his wishes came true. However, that extreme good luck hadn't lasted long and was gone after a few hours. In the following days, his luck seemed to have returned to normal. Or it might have increased a bit. In any case, luck was an abstract concept that was somewhat difficult to define, and there was no way for him to measure it with a scale. The only thing he could be sure of was that it was relatively easier for him now to draw upon the power of the stars. So either his strength, or his luck, or both had increased. However, Zen was also troubled by the fact that the chaotic energy inside his body still wasn't showing any signs of liquefying. Theoretically speaking, by the time a warrior broke through to the Soul Sea realm, his life vitality should have already begun to liquefy. However, the chaotic energy inside him was still rolling around in his cinnabar field like waves. He couldn't find anything in the primal chaos technique to explain this, nor did he have any books that talked of this matter. His master had only speculated that like the life vitality, the chaotic energy would also turn into the chaotic sea. However, it was obvious that his master's deduction was wrong, at least at this stage. To condense life vitality, one has to compress it to the limit in order to liquefy it, much like any gas would behave. But it is very difficult to produce chaotic energy in the first place. It cannot be replenished by absorbing life vitality from the outside world, and the chaotic energy itself is relatively slow in production. How can one possibly compress it? For the last few days, Zen had been deeply troubled by this problem. In order to find a solution, he would occasionally venture out to refresh his mind, hoping to obtain some enlightenment. While he was thinking about it, Zen would also often converse with the Cyan Dragon. Among the genuine dragons, the Cyan Dragon had extensive experience and vast knowledge. However, when it came to Zen's problem, even he seemed to have no idea why things were what they were. The Cyan Dragon was familiar with the life vitality system, and the Red Dragon was familiar with the body refining system. They specialized in two different areas, but the cultivation method of the chaotic system was simply unheard of to them. However, the Cyan Dragon did have a suggestion to give that piqued Zen's interest. When Zen had been in the eastern region, he had once obtained a cultivation method of the ogre race called the Heavenly Ogre Fist. It had played an extremely important role for him when he had begun to learn the martial arts. In the eyes of the Cyan Dragon, the fist intent and moves contained in the Heavenly Ogre Fist were nothing special, but the demonic life energy cultivated from the Heavenly Ogre Fist had very interesting properties. This demonic life energy could almost completely devour other life energies and make them its own. As time passed, Zen had become more focused on learning other cultivation methods and had stopped practicing the Heavenly Ogre Fist. But now that the Cyan Dragon brought it up, it provided Zen with a new way of thinking. Although the Cyan Dragon wasn't clear about the reason why Zen was unable to liquefy his chaotic energy, the way he saw it, there was a very high probability that the amount of chaotic energy that Zen had was not enough to be compressed into a liquid. Therefore, the Cyan Dragon had a bold idea, suggesting that Zen use the mind method recorded in the Heavenly Ogre Fist and make chaotic energy possess the ability of devouring power. When he heard this suggestion, Zen's gaze flickered slightly. This idea could probably work. And he couldn't wait to try it out. The path he was on was a road never taken before. He had to grope around to progress all by himself anyway. This gave him an advantage. Even if he went wrong, he could start over again, and he would not be stuck with the rules of this universe. After all, he had seen his master travel in the chaos and vaguely knew that this primal chaos technique had already surpassed the rules of this universe. This meant that there were no bounds on it. If Zen still stuck to the rules, then he would be too pedantic. When the idea was suggested, Zen didn't waste any time and immediately started to practice according to the mind method recorded in the Heavenly Ogre Fist. Using chaotic energy to activate other cultivation methods wasn't something new. For example, any law power when activated by chaotic energy would increase several times. For that reason, Zen had strong expectations with his experiment, and was quite confident that the chaotic energy would be able to generate the demonic life vitality. As Zen practiced the mind method in the Heavenly Ogre Fist, the chaotic energy within his body boiled. A trace of chaotic energy extricated itself from Zen's cinnabar field and circulated along his meridians. Finally, it shot out from his fingertip. A thin strand of gray chaotic energy, much like a thick mist, began to float around his hand. This strand of chaotic energy was activated by the mind method of Heavenly Ogre Fist. I wonder if it possesses the devouring power. Zen was a little nervous, but in the blink of an eye, his nervousness completely disappeared and eagerness took its place. He laughed and thought to himself, even if I fail, I can look for another method. Who's there to stop me? What is there to be nervous about? Thinking about that, he reached into his space ring and brought out a supreme life vitality crystal. Streams of thick life vitality were preserved in this small stone. Zen did not immediately crush the life vitality crystal. Instead, he gently tapped the stone with his finger and a small hole appeared. A wisp of pure life vitality flowed out from the hole. Before it could properly escape, Zen injected the chaotic energy on his fingertips into the life vitality crystal, his eyes staring straight at it with a firm gaze. Not working. Through the transparent stone shell, Zen could see that the brown chaotic energy was continuously swirling within the life vitality crystal. It didn't fuse with the milky white life vitality within the crystal, nor did it show any signs of trying to devour the life vitality. Zen curled his lips. It seemed that he'd been too naive and the experiment had failed. Ah well, wait. Just as Zen was about to put the life vitality crystal back into his space ring, the entire crystal suddenly exploded right in front of him. Chapter 11:10. The Creation of the Soul Sea. Zen was startled as the supreme life vitality crystal suddenly exploded. It shattered into tiny fragments, but the life vitality it contained did not shoot out. Instead, it was replaced by several wisps of chaotic energy. Zen had transferred only a small amount of chaotic energy into the stone shell. Now, it had increased greatly from the original measure. However, due to the impact from the explosion, the currents of chaotic energy looked like thin whips that lashed out fiercely in all directions, leaving behind in its wake countless tiny dents in the room. Hiss, hiss. From the dents, other strands of chaotic energy slowly rose up like little gray snakes. Zen's eyes widened as he looked at the scene in front of him. He was beyond bewildered at what was happening. In only a few seconds, the small dents in the room had multiplied. The little gray snakes of chaotic energy quickly eroded everything in their surroundings, while giving rise to more strands. Zen, if you don't do anything about all this chaotic energy right now, this house will collapse. The cyan dragon's words rang faintly in Zen's ears with warning. At this, Zen finally came back to his senses. He waved his finger lightly, and the strands of chaotic energy quickly shrunk. One after another, the little gray snakes crawled out of every corner of the room and gathered in Zen's hand. Zen was now holding chaotic energy that was 1,000 times larger than before. The wisp of chaotic energy that he had poured into the crystal was not much thicker than a thin thread. Now it was the size of a fist. It seems that the chaotic energy can absorb much more than the life vitality in the crystal. If things have continued, it would have swallowed the whole house. Zen said in a daze, staring at the mass of chaotic energy in his hand. The cyan dragon broke through his musing. It is capable of more than that. Chaotic energy would be able to devour everything, he said. The cyan dragon was unable to keep his composure at the turn of events. The suggestion that Zen tried things for himself came from the cyan dragon, and from the look of things, the chances of failure were far greater than the chances of success. The cyan dragon had lived through hundreds of thousands of years and had seen many different kinds of cultivation methods. When Zen had first entered the cloud sect to select his cultivation method, the cyan dragon kept the heavenly ogre fist in mind. It was a technique that could manipulate life vitality into such power that it would be able to ravage and devour everything. It was a very unique cultivation method, and its origins had remained unknown. No one could even be sure that it originated from the ogre. Zen had been preoccupied with other things, and thus was not able to take time to discover the history behind this cultivation method. The cyan dragon had suggested that Zen fuse the characteristics of the heavenly ogre fist with the chaotic energy that dwelt inside his body. The insatiate nature of the chaotic energy was far more forceful than the life vitality. Not only could it devour the life vitality, it could even devour the entire house. Even the cyan dragon himself could not help but be astounded. An elated expression was on Zen's face when he recovered from shock. Even his master might not have conceived such an attempt. What his master wrote about the primal chaos technique had only been speculations. He surmised that breaking into the soul sea realm would yield the same results for chaotic energy as it would with life vitality. The chaotic energy would liquefy and turn into the sea of chaos. Perhaps his master had neglected other considerations. Zen's eyes flashed when he thought of this. He raised his hand and tentatively pointed a finger. The next instant, the mass of chaotic energy in front of him shot towards a square table in the corner. Hiss! The coagulation of chaotic energy passed through the center of the square table, puncturing it with fist-sized hole. Under Zen's control, chaotic energy flowed continuously along the square table. It was as if it housed an invisible monster. Within a few seconds, the table had been completely devoured. Once again, Zen collected the bulk of chaotic energy in his hands. Its size had increased even more from before. Fascinating. The chaotic energy keeps on devouring everything I direct it towards. When the chaotic energy in my body condenses enough, it would be able to liquefy and turn into a sea. Zen's eyes kept flashing. The process seemed to be a bit of a troublesome task. Many other warriors were naturally able to create the soul sea in their bodies after reaching the soul sea realm, but Zen was a different case altogether. He would have to go to greater lengths to form a sea in his body. In the end, however, it would yield him a greater reward. Chaotic energy could be found everywhere, and it was not particular with its source. With everything else at his disposal, the chaotic energy within his body would be inexhaustible, and Zen could make use of it as much as he needed or pleased. At this moment, the door swung open. Freya came inside with a pot of tea in her hands. Since the beginning, Zen had already told Freya not to bother serving him like a servant to a master. He did not need nor want her to act as if she was of a lesser status. However, Freya maintained her actions and tried her best to take care of Zen. Numerous dents came into sight as she entered the room, and a strange expression appeared on her face. Silently, she stepped back and exited the room. Freya was extremely respectful. She would not even glance at things that she were not supposed to see, and she never pressed Zen for details, waiting for him to tell her of his own accord instead. For the following stretch of time, Zen tested chaotic energy continuously, learning as much of its characteristics as he could. Back then, Zen's demonic life vitality had not been as powerful in terms of devouring matter. It could devour ordinary life energy and life vitality directly, but it was at a much slower pace, especially if the items to be devoured were formed through visualization and imagination. Apart from this, there were some forms of conjured items that the demonic life vitality would not be able to ingest. Chaotic energy seemed to be more or less the same. When the chaotic energy absorbed ordinary things such as tables and chairs, it was able to do so at an incredible speed. It proved to be the same with materials made of wood or clay. Metals, on the other hand, took a little bit more time to be devoured. With this discovery, Zen proceeded to fetch various things and fed them to the chaotic energy, including precious things such as mysterious weapons, spiritual weapons, fairy weapons, and other treasures. What he discovered with this was that the higher the grade and the more powerful the weapon was, the longer it took the chaotic energy to absorb it. In order to test this further, Zen had even let the chaotic energy swallow a sacred weapon. It took about half a day for it to be completely ingested. With this pattern, an even longer time would be needed for the chaotic energy to devour a divine weapon. Zen fed the chaotic energy weapon after weapon, its amount increasing at every instance. He felt his belly expand with the massive size of the energy. Ever since he started training the primal chaos technique, the internal world started to slowly refine the chaotic energy. Upon reaching a certain amount, it had stopped increasing, and he did not feel full for a long time. However, as Zen continued to devour things with his chaotic energy, the chaotic energy inside him increased, and the entire inner world began to narrow down, making the chaotic energy contained within him start to condense. Once the concentration of chaotic energy had reached its limit, it would be able to liquefy. Zen continued to pour chaotic energy inside him while paying attention to the changes in his body. He was not disappointed. Soon enough, his inner world was made visible. Masses of chaotic energy gathered together and formed a brown-colored liquid that quickly sank into the depths. After the first portion of chaotic energy started to liquefy, the entire internal world underwent a tremendous change. As the brown liquid continued to form, edges had begun to appear. For 6 days, the liquefaction continued. On the 7th day, the brown sea in Zen's inner world began to slowly fluctuate. He had already stepped into the soul sea realm after passing through 10 small heavenly tribulations, but he had only truly created the soul sea today. Compared to other soul sea realm warriors' soul seas, his was much different. The constantly churning waves of his soul sea would enable chaotic energy to completely swallow even a divine weapon. Not long after Zen's soul sea was established, a familiar voice rang in his ears. It was Lincoln who contacted him by burning the message rune Zen had given him before. It seemed that he had already arrived at the Auspice City. With Lincoln's invitation, Zen had arrived at the dark world and had been waiting for word from him for a long time. Circumstances appeared to be in his favor, as Lavender knew of some of the dark world's secrets. Zen had every intention of getting the resources there. Zen responded to Lincoln's message and told Freya to pack up and make preparations to set off. Chapter 11:11, The Dark Underground Palace. Lincoln had given him directions in his message. Zen and Freya traveled through Auspis City and after a few minutes found themselves in a commoners' district. People from different levels and social status lived in the area. Most of them were ordinary people, but some of the wealthiest men were able to afford to hire some martial artists who served as guards to their houses. Thus, low-level martial artists, such as those in the illuminating soul realm, could be seen occasionally. In this kind of setting, the arrival of two martial artists of the Soul Sea realm was something that immediately attracted curious gazes. Young boys watched Zen and Freya with yearning. The auras that surrounded the two were far stronger and more arresting than those of the martial artists they usually saw. Soon, these boys trailed behind them, no doubt attracted to their energy. A frown appeared in Freya's face even as she followed closely after Zen. She did not understand why they were in this place. They walked for a short distance. Then, a large manor came into their sight. A fat landlord bowed respectfully at the entrance, leading the two into the manor. He was one of the affluent merchants in this region. That was what common people thought. All of his wealth would amount to no more than 1 or 2,000 supreme life vitality crystals, a number that, to martial artists, was not even worth mentioning. However, it was quite an accomplishment for an ordinary mortal to earn this much without a martial artist's ability. After all, this was the rough equivalent to the annual expenditure of a third-grade clan. The landlord did not know who Zen was. None of the several martial artists that he hired to guard his house did, either. They could not even tell Zen's and Freya's cultivation levels, more so their identities. All the landlord knew was that the two had unimaginable strength. For a mere mortal, he possessed shrewdness that served him well. He had always treated martial artists with reverence, no matter who or what level they were. Upon their arrival, he would respectfully lead them into his mansion and ask his wife and children to stay in other places in Auspis City, leaving behind some servants to serve his guests. All of this served to his self-interest as well. He knew that with their strength, they could easily turn decades of hard work into dust, and there was no one to help him if that happened. Zen and Freya were led into a room that seemed like a cellar. The oil lamps that hung on the wall had all been extinguished, and no lamps provided light. He had been given explicit instructions not to light any lamps, and did not dare to disobey. Right now, he only wished for these martial artists to leave as soon as possible. He tiptoed around his own mansion, afraid of unknowingly offending them in some way. Their motives were unclear to him, but he did his best to satisfy them, in the interest of protecting the wealth that he and his family had accumulated bit by bit for 3 generations. The dark cellar led to an open space. In the middle was a round table, around which sat 8 people. All of them tried their best to conceal their cultivation bases, but the faint auras they gave off were telling of their strength. Zen had sensed their auras immediately after entering the cellar. A trace of wariness appeared on his face. "Zen, here you are," Lincoln spoke. He was sitting on one side of the round table and laughed heartily upon seeing Zen's expression. "Sit down first, and then we'll talk." The light in the space was dim, but it hardly mattered to these warriors. They did not need much light to be able to observe one another. There seemed to be something amiss with the atmosphere, as if all of them were animals that would strike at the slightest provocation. Zen had expected Lincoln to have other companions. However, he did not think that he would invite martial artists at the Spirit Supreme realm. These men gave off an aura that was almost sinister, and Zen was immediately on guard at their presence. Just when Zen and Freya were about to sit down on 2 empty chairs, one of the martial artists spoke up derisively, "Lincoln, why did you bring these 2 good-for-nothings along to explore the dark underground palace?" Zen's brow creased at his words. Lincoln had previously told him that he was the only one who knew about the secret treasures of the dark world, so the upcoming exploration should be led by him, but it seemed that it was no longer the case. Lincoln tried to smooth things over, laughing away the beginnings of embarrassment. "Don't say that. I was able to leave the villain world with Zen's help, so he must be part of the expedition to the dark underground palace." "Humph. With 1 portion for you and 1 portion for him, how much would be left for me and my brothers?" Another martial artist said, clearly dissatisfied. Lincoln was visibly displeased at his words. His expression turned cold as he answered, "I have already made an agreement with Adrian. You and your brothers will be taking 30% of the secret treasures in the underground palace. I will decide what to do with the rest." Quote, Lincoln was at the later stage of the Soul Sea realm, and he possessed incredible talent. With the wrath of the ocean, he had no reason to be afraid of these martial artists who were at the Spirit Supreme realm. 30%? Are you insulting us? You will only be leading the way. Why are you entitled to take away 70%? What qualifications do you have to do that? Another martial artist challenged. A disdainful glint passed through Lincoln's eyes. Well, then, I'd like to see you try and get it alone. Since you think I do not have the qualifications, then you are free to leave. The underground palace is right below the city. I'm sure all of you can find the treasures of the dark world on your own, he said in a voice that was almost freezing in its coldness. Cut the garbage, Lincoln. Who do you take us for? If you don't bring us into the underground palace, then don't even think about leaving the dark world, another one of the men threatened. An intimidating aura exuded from him as he finished his words. It was as if they were in the presence of a demon. Above the cellar was the landlord's courtyard. The sinister aura penetrated through the walls and spread out, forming tremendous force on mortal souls. In an instant, all the people within a 10-mile radius fainted. Lincoln remained calm in the face of such an overwhelming soul force. Zen's gaze, similarly, was indifferent. Ordinary Soul Sea realm martial artists stood no chance against Spirit Supreme realm warriors, but both Lincoln and Zen had the qualifications to enter the Gauze Pavilion. In the instance that a fight erupted, the two men would have no fear of the people in front of them. Seeing that a fight was threatening to break out before the group set off, a warrior in the corner laughed dryly and began to mediate. Men, let's not fight over such a trivial matter. We should follow the agreement. The man who spoke was Adrian, the warrior who had devised the plan against Zen and Layla back on Willow Island. Lincoln had promised Adrian 30% of the secret treasures of the Dark World if he helped Lincoln regain his freedom. Adrian was extremely smart, but his cultivation and strength were far from enough, so he invited those 7 brothers to come together. They were independent warriors from the upper world. Upon receiving the invitation, they found out that the one who was able to open the underground palace was a warrior who was merely at the later stage of the Soul Sea realm. It wounded their pride, and they began to hold Lincoln in contempt. Moreover, they would get only 30% of secret treasures, which was far from enough for them. To their surprise, Lincoln had invited Zen in addition to Adrian and themselves. This newcomer's cultivation level was even lower. What right did he have to get a portion? Adrian's words worked. He had managed to persuade the two sides and the tension on the atmosphere thawed out. Of course, the 7 brothers didn't want Zen with them. He was a nobody. However, only Lincoln knew the way to enter the underground palace. With Adrian's persuasion, they had no choice but to temporarily restrain their tempers. Lincoln had a fiery disposition, but he had always been a man of his word. He had promised Adrian 30%, and temporarily set aside his own anger. The complexity of the underground palace far surpasses your imagination. Before we enter it, we need to make some preparations. We can't set out without being fully prepared, he said, more calmly now. He knew very well that they would have to fight against the evil energy in the underground palace. After devising a good plan, they left the mansion and headed to Auspice City to secure some items. Then, they gathered once again at the place that Lincoln had designated. Chapter 11-12. A long narrow passage. The dark underground palace wasn't considered a secret place in the dark world. Many creatures in the dark world were also well aware that there was an underground palace here. However, in the last 100,000 years, no one had been able to enter its mysterious depths. Legend had it that a supreme lord in remote ages had once passed away in this place hundreds of millions of years ago. Time was the most powerful opponent of all warriors. Even a supreme lord's lifespan was not without its limits. If a supreme lord was unable to become a true god, he or she would eventually encounter the 5 aging processes and die. Immortality could not be achieved easily. Therefore, the eternal life was also one of warriors' ultimate goals. It was said that before this supreme lord from remote ages had passed away, he had used extremely special methods to set up an incomparably grand underground palace, and that he had left behind all of his knowledge and inheritances within it. It was rumored to be a treasure trove for any martial artist. Each time the dark underground palace was opened, the time and method required to open it were different. In the endless years since it had first been established, there had been many warriors who had entered the underground palace and obtained great benefits from it. However, entering the underground palace was not something that any warrior could hope to accomplish. Lavender had once entered the dark underground palace. This was already 10,000 years ago when the underground palace had opened. When Lavender had once been in the underground palace, she had also obtained a wealth of resources and benefits. Therefore, when she had heard that Lincoln had also found a way to enter the dark underground palace, she immediately made Zen agree to accompany him. If she remembered correctly, the resources left behind in the underground palace would be of great help to Zen in his endeavors. Following Lincoln's lead, they traversed through more than half of Auspice City and quickly found the entrance to the dark underground palace. The entrance to the underground palace was not hard to find. It was not hidden. However, after the last 10 years of evolution, the entrance to the underground palace had actually become a place frequented by commoners. Of course, no commoner would dare to stop warriors as they passed through. They didn't meet any troubles before they stood in front of the dark underground palace. This is the entrance to the underground palace, Lincoln told Zen. However, Adrian chuckled from behind them. Everyone knows that this is the entrance to the underground palace. It's hardly a secret, it's just that no one knows how to explore it and find the treasures. We'll have to trouble you to lead the way, Lincoln, since you have found a way. As for the 7 brothers who followed behind Adrian, their expressions were indifferent. Despite Adrian's constant reminders to be watchful of their manners, they could not hide the raw greed on their faces. They were little more than treasure hunters, and brought no respect to the time-honored traditions of the warriors. In their eyes, as long as Lincoln could successfully lead them to find the treasures, everyone else could then be killed, other than themselves, of course. As for Adrian, he was still quite useful to them, so they could temporarily spare his life. To these men, life held little value. "Follow me." A confident expression settled on Lincoln's face as he took the lead and entered the passage. Zen, Freya, and the other warriors, who followed behind him, also entered the dark and forbidding passage. This passage was incredibly long and sloped slightly downwards. Adrian and the 7 brothers had collected a vast amount of information before they had come here, so they had formed a good understanding of the underground palace. They had already known that the passage into the underground palace was quite complicated, and its length would be astonishing to behold. But it was not until now that they began to realize how long it truly was. This passage extended downwards and continued for an unknown distance. Without hesitation, they soon stepped into the passage. At the start, everyone had proceeded forward on foot, but very quickly, they discovered that the passage was so long that they could not see the end of it, nor could they reach it easily. Everyone then started to fly to speed up their journey. At the same time, something was happening in the western part of the dark world. There was a sacred place named Magnolia Sacred Place there. There were many races found in the entire dark world. However, because this supreme world was situated at the junction of 3 great races, the 3 strongest races in this world were still the ogres, the human race, and the demon knight race. These 3 races had all established their own 10th grade sacred places in the dark world, but because of the geopolitical formalities, which they all observed, these 3 sacred places interacted extremely well with each other. There wasn't much competition among them, and they maintained trade relations with each other. So it could be said that these 3 sacred places were the windows through which the 3 races interacted with each other. However, in other supreme worlds, the 3 races still fought against each other and all kinds of conflicts never ended. The Magnolia Sacred Place was a 10th grade sacred place established by the human race. In the center of this sacred place, there stood a towering palace that pierced the clouds. 2 black-clothed warriors were rapidly entering the palace now. "Saint Lord, a few warriors have entered the underground palace again today," said one of the 2 black-robed warriors in a respectful tone. Their leader, who sat enthroned in the palace, asked with an indifferent face, "Who are they? What is their race? Do you know their cultivation levels?" "They are human warriors. There are only 11 of them in total. 7 people are at the Spirit Supreme Realm. The other 4 are all at the Soul Sea Realm," the black-robed warrior again answered very respectfully. The leader shook his head. "Every year, there are some overconfident warriors who enter the underground place, thinking that they can open it and find some treasures. But, Saint Lord, the activation of this underground palace doesn't have any fixed pattern. Maybe they can succeed in opening it this time," the black-robed warrior said. The Saint Lord of the Magnolia Sacred Place smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I've already set up a monitoring array in the underground palace. If the underground palace is opened, I'll receive the news immediately. If they really succeed in opening it, it would be the best news for us, and I can then send our disciples there." When Zen and the others had been walking in the passage leading to the underground palace, all 3 biggest sacred places in the dark world had somehow received the news. These sacred places had only paid attention to the movements of Zen and his companions. Other than that, they didn't do anything. Every once in a while, warriors would seek to enter the underground palace for a variety of reasons. But the last time that the underground palace had opened was over 100,000 years ago. It had never been successfully reopened since then. However, this did not mean that the three sacred places did not value this underground palace. It was a place of strategic importance, and whichever warriors did make it into the palace would gain the upper hand in the current status quo among the three races. This was, after all, the resting place of a supreme lord from remote ages. Although the underground palace had been opened so many times before, no one had managed to take out the most important secret treasures. The entire dark world was still relatively barren compared to the other supreme worlds. If there was a chance to enter the underground palace again, how could the sacred places possibly let it go? This was a rare opportunity for the warriors who were all questing to their own personal betterment. Therefore, every sacred place had secretly set up networks of spies, and had placed them at the entrance of the underground palace or perhaps even in the passage. And every time creatures had entered the hidden depths of the underground palace, these spies would closely observe them. Besides the 3 10th grade sacred places, there were also many 7th grade and 8th grade sacred places, and many sects that secretly observed everything that was happening in the entrance and passage of the underground palace. It could be said that when Lincoln led Zen and the rest down the passage, their movements had already been observed by the many forces of the dark world. If they really succeeded in opening the dark underground palace, these forces would soon take actions. How long is this tunnel? Someone complained in frustration. The person who had complained was called Koihu. The names of the 7 brothers were very distinctive. The eldest was called A-Flat-Hu, and the other 6 brothers were Bal-Hu, Koihu. The youngest one was named Gil-Hu. The first letters of their given names were A, B, C, D, E, F and G. Thus it was easy to remember their names. With their names, they could even easily figure out who was elder and who was younger among them. You should be a bit more patient, Koi. It is said that this underground palace is truly huge. Besides, it's only been 4 hours, and you can't take it anymore. A-Flat-Hu said indifferently and sneered. There must be a limit or end to this, no matter how long the passage is. We have already traveled hundreds of thousands of miles. When will this be the end? Koihu continued to complain bitterly after his brother teased him. Actually, not only Koihu, but the others were all muttering in their minds. Even flying at their current top speed, they could still not see the end of the passage. Indeed, they had never seen such a long passage before. It seemed to continue indefinitely. I heard that this underground palace was built by a supreme lord. Therefore, crossing through a supreme world would be quite normal here. This unit of length then is normal and acceptable. I'm just afraid that if we keep flying down there, we won't be able to reach the end in 2 or 3 months, Bal-Hu said and shook his head, not wanting to seem weak before his peers. At that moment, Adrian, who was following after them, suddenly pointed ahead and said, "It seems like we have finally reached the end." Everyone's eyes immediately lit up as they looked towards the front. From the looks of it, there was no other way forward. Ahead of them was a solid wall. It seemed that they had indeed reached the end of the passage. But then, their faces were filled with disappointment. Stepping closer, they found that this was only a turn in the passage. After turning this corner, there was still an endless passage stretching ahead of them. "Go on," A-Flat-Hu said helplessly. His brothers had become more and more impatient. However, at this moment, Lincoln said, "Wait." Everyone's eyes focused on Lincoln. A-Flat-Hu asked impatiently, "What is it?" Lincoln couldn't be bothered to answer these brutish warriors. These 7 brothers were only able to follow him into the underground palace because of Adrian. Completely ignoring them, Lincoln took out a divine texture from his space ring and pasted it onto the wall of the passage. Afterwards, Lincoln concentrated and poured his life vitality into the divine texture. A faintly green light began to spread out, shining onto the wall in front of them. With a grating sound of stone on stone, the wall slid to the side in a shower of dust and cobwebs. As the wall on the side of the passage opened up, another passage appeared before them. Chapter 11:13, Snake Heads. 2 passages. From the look on his face, Adrian seemed to be quite surprised. Curling his lips, Lincoln said, "If you decide to take the passage on the left, you won't ever be able to step foot into the dark underground palace until the end of time." Originally, when he agreed to Adrian's request, it had been solely because he helped him to gain his freedom. Back then, he wasn't really expecting that Adrian would be insisting on taking the 7 Spirit Supreme Realm warriors along with them. To be capable of cultivating to such a level, it should go without saying that none of them were fools. Lincoln might have been so relaxed all the time, but he was also quite a brave and cautious man. The 7 brothers, on the other hand, were by no means good people. There was a good chance that they'd opt to take all of the treasures the moment he opened the entrance to the underground palace. Be that as it might, Lincoln had faith in his own abilities. And on top of that, he was even more confident in Zen's capabilities. If they could behave well in the process, things would be good, but were they to do something that troubled him or Zen, they would just be shooting themselves in the foot. The moment the hidden passage was opened, a dark and numbing aura blew out from deep within. It felt as though a countless number of ghosts had been rushing toward them, with each and every single one of them baring their fangs and swinging their claws, raring to tear everyone to shreds. Such a dense amount of dark energy. A-flat exclaimed in awe. It's a good thing that I brought this with me. Adrian, who had been standing on the side, brought out several pale yellow branches. These branches were from the sun flame tree. It was a type of tree with fire attribute, which was rather hard to come by. It only grew at the top of a number of volcanoes. In the event that a volcano would erupt and the tree would get covered by layers of lava, the sun flame tree would not burn, and instead, it would actually even draw in the heat from the lava itself. Making use of the branches from the sun flame tree to withstand the dark energy was a great plan. It was something that Lincoln had asked them to prepare beforehand. As if Freya was carrying out a feat of magic, 2 branches of the sun flame tree suddenly manifested in her hands. After handing one over to Zen, she kept one for herself. Then, with just a wave of Zen's hand, 2 balls of fire appeared and ignited the tips of the branches they were holding. Despite the fact that the branches of the sun flame tree were completely dry, the speed at which they had been burned wasn't that fast. In actuality, they simply let out a bit of smoke as dark red light was emitted from the burning area. When the branches were lit up, the dark energy suddenly met its archenemy. It was just like ice and snow coming into contact with a big fire as it rapidly melted away. Well, then, let's go in, Lincoln said, as he held onto a branch of the sun flame tree, showing them the way into the hidden passage. The lips of the 7 brothers moved slightly, making it seem as though they were communicating through the use of life vitality. Even though Zen was unable to hear anything, he could tell from just a single glance that they were probably up to no good. He and Freya then stepped into the depths of the passage as well, each of them having a branch of sun flame tree in their hands. Zen's lips moved just the slightest bit, and he whispered to Lincoln in secret, "Those guys seem to be plotting something. Are you going to turn tail?" Letting out a soft chuckle, Lincoln couldn't help but poke fun at him. "Are you kidding me?" Zen replied flatly, "I just wanted you to know. There's no need for you to get anxious. It's gonna be just fine if these guys don't do anything, and I'll keep my promise and give them their shares. And even if they do, then they'll just be digging their own graves," Lincoln replied, sounding so sure of himself. Right after saying that, he asked Zen, "Isn't that right, Zen?" From this, it was easy to understand that he intended for Zen to be on his side. Of course, there was a deadpan look on Zen's face. Truth be told, he couldn't really care less about the agreement made between Lincoln and those warriors. That being said, if those people acted recklessly, he wouldn't really have any qualms about getting rid of them whatsoever. Right now, it wasn't just the people from the Magnolia Sacred Place who had their eyes on them. In the purple bamboo sacred place of the Demon Knight, there were also some warriors who had been keeping a watchful eye on them. They have already located the second passage. It looks like they came prepared, or at least, they didn't come barging in. The Saint Lord of the sacred place stood atop the highest leaf. Despite the leaf being just about the size of a palm, it was still able to hold the weight of a warrior. They've just arrived at the second passage. That doesn't really count for anything, given the fact that they still have 7 passages ahead of them. What's more, with regards to this matter of the Dark and Light 9-turn passage, it wasn't much of a secret anyway. One could easily ask around in the dark world and learn about it. The only thing we have to do is wait and see whether they really have a way to open the underground palace or not, stated another Demon Knight woman, with a smile creeping onto her face. If one intended to get to the dark underground palace, there was no other choice but to go through the Dark and Light 9-turn passage, and all of those 9 turns had to be chosen correctly. If they so much as made a mistake along the way, then entering the underground palace would be out of the question, and one could only aimlessly go through the endless maze of passages. The level of difficulty of making it through the Dark and Light 9-turn passage might not appear to be too high at first glance. One would have to accurately choose between 2 different passages 9 times. If one were to pin their hope solely on luck, the probability of getting through and choosing all the correct passages was only 1 in 1,028. In any case, it wasn't really that big of a secret in the dark world whether one should take the light or the dark passage. One could find that out without difficulty by simply asking around in this supreme world. However, at this moment, the 3 great races were all hoping that Lincoln's group had not learned of this secret from asking around in the dark world, but from other supreme worlds. Only then would they be able to have hopes of opening the underground palace. The things that the Supreme Lord from remote ages had left behind were exceedingly tempting to any 10th grade sacred place. For that reason, it shouldn't come as a surprise that everyone, be it ogres or demon knight members, would have their attentions completely focused on every single person who had stepped foot into the place. After a couple of hours of walking along the dimly lit passage, Lincoln suddenly stopped once again. Then, he proceeded to open up a light passage that didn't seem to contain any dark energy. What they had to do next was travel back and forth between two entirely distinct passages with Lincoln leading the way. Going through each passage would take a couple of hours. Upon making their way through the 6th and 7th passages, they opted to take some time to rest before going on their way. Finally, after 2 days and 2 nights of seemingly endless walking, they were now done pacing through this inconceivably long passage. Turning his head around to gaze upon the passage which they had just walked through, Coy blurted out, with fear apparently still remaining in his heart, "Just how long is this passage? We should probably be a long way away from Auspice City by this time, right?" "It's not that far away," answered Adrian, who had been staying on the tail end of the group, pointing with his finger. It is indeed true that every single one of these passages is of quite a considerable length, but all of these passages had been designed in a way that we have only been walking in 2 big circles around Auspice City. At this point, we should have already made our way back to the bottom part of the city. "Are we actually right below Auspice City?" Finhu cried out, seemingly so dumbfounded. Nodding his head, Lincoln answered apathetically, "What Adrian said is correct. We are currently at the bottom of Auspice City. All of you, follow me." After telling them that, Lincoln led the way and was the first to exit the passage. Hearing his words, the group immediately followed him. The moment they got out of the passage, the area surrounding them turned bright in an instant. And right in front of everyone was a colossal statue of a 9-head snake that was about the size of a mountain. "5 heads of the 9-head snake have already been cut off," exclaimed Freya all of a sudden, who was standing behind Zen, with her eyes wide open. There were a total of 9 massive snake heads protruding on top of the huge statue. Every single one of them had their fangs exposed, giving them the appearance like they could swallow the warriors at any second. Apart from that, the statue had quite a lifelike appearance. However, 5 out of the 9 snake heads were severed just around the neck area, leaving behind only 4 snake heads still intact. Lincoln sized up the snake heads before he flew up and headed straight toward the 7th head of the 9-head snake statue. "The 7th head of the snake statue? Is that how he's going to open the 7th passage? Ha, it seems like we're gonna need to get our disciples ready to go on an exploration of the underground palace. If the underground palace really were to get opened, it's going to take a lot of effort to fight for it and take everything inside." Meanwhile, in the dark Asura's sacred place of the dark world, a mountain-like ogre warrior had his gaze fixated on the scene that was happening in front of him and let out a blaring laugh, appearing as though he had great confidence in Lincoln's following actions. There was a total of 9 ways to open the underground palace created by the Supreme Lord from remote ages, and those 9 ways had been carefully passed down from generation to generation in great secrecy. None of the methods which could be used to open the underground palace were alike, so it was almost impossible to work those things out. And above all else, the Supreme Lord had placed quite a troublesome enchanted barrier inside the underground palace for undisclosed reasons. For a Soul Sea Realm or Spirit Supreme Realm warrior, this enchanted barrier could be considered as an overwhelming experience. Be that as it might, to a lot of World Lords and Supreme Lords, it wasn't really something particularly worth mentioning. The main problem was that as long as the enchanted barrier received any sort of damage, everything in the underground palace would be destroyed instantly. For that very reason, not a single mighty warrior could force their way in. Chapter 11:14, Little Moths. The Supreme Lord's origin was extremely mysterious, mostly because it was literally ancient history that had been forgotten due to the passage of time. This underground palace had already been explored before, but none of the warriors who went in had managed to successfully unravel the mystery behind the Supreme Lord's true identity. This wasn't a normal occurrence. The origins of each and every Supreme Lord were meticulously recorded, documented, and compiled ever since the start of the Grand Era. To forget such important information was extremely rare. A Supreme Lord, after all, had a fixed, constant position in the universe, and the replacement of one was usually only due to the death of a former one, which would no doubt generate a lot of attention and shock from the heavens. However, nobody found any clues or documents pertaining to the origins of this Supreme Lord in the Dark World. The 9-head snake statue at the entrance of the underground palace served as the only hint that the Supreme Lord might likely possess this creature's bloodline. There were 9 entrances, each corresponding to an individual snake head. Each head meant an opportunity to open up the underground palace. Every time an entrance was opened, the snake's head would break and an enchanted barrier would open. The underground palace would then patiently wait for the next time it could be opened. Lavender had entered this palace 100,000 years ago through the sixth snake head. 100,000 years later, Lincoln obtained the opportunity to explore the palace through the seventh snake head. The sacred places in the dark world paid careful attention to this underground palace and were always aware whenever someone was able to gain the opportunity to open up an entrance. If Lincoln could open the entrance, then the sacred places would waste no time sending their young elites over. Everyone waited with bated breath as Lincoln entered the seventh snake head. It was incredibly silent, especially since the palace was located miles underground. A needle dropped on the floor would no doubt echo through this palace. However, the silence was broken by a sound. Tick-tack. It was the sound of water drops dripping onto the ground. It didn't sound too far away and the seven Who brothers were quickly on guard. Despite being Spirit Supreme Realm warriors, they were scared as well. There were a lot of things that could go bump in the dark, especially here. Tick-tack, tick-tack, tick-tack. The droplets had gotten faster, echoing all throughout the underground palace's entrance. Freya was visibly afraid and moved closer towards Zen. "What is it?" she asked. Zen frowned and quickly activated his magical eyes skill. A tinge of green flashed across his eyes as he surveyed the dark spots where no light was present. "Lincoln," he called out in a clear voice. "How long will it take you to open that entrance?" "Just a moment," Lincoln said. His voice was faint since he had already completely entered the seventh snake head. "Hurry up, please, we might be in a bit of trouble here," he said. His tone was very calm but his words did nothing to comfort Freya. Zen was an omnipotent being in her eyes. For someone like him to describe something as trouble meant whatever was hiding in that dark place was horrible and frightening. Adrian thought the same thing. Despite being the weakest, he was the cleverest among the group. He had already witnessed Zen's abilities back in the Willow Island, so he didn't dare doubt his words now. The Who brothers weren't that worried, however. They were quite confident with their cultivation base, perhaps even a bit too cocky. A-flat snorted at Zen's words, "If you don't have the guts, then maybe you should leave. A coward isn't worthy of getting a share of the dark world's secret treasures. Koi, go take a look." Zen did not grace him with a reply, his green eyes still fixated on the darkness that was laid in front of them. However, hearing A-flat order Koi to go check it made him smile. Koi gave Zen a look of disdain as he passed by him before entering the darkness. This was the dark space at the side of the nine-head snake statue. Despite having a glint pearl in his hand, Koi was only able to see the surrounding area around him. "Koi, did you find anything?" A-flat asked. Koi let out a booming laugh and answered, "There's nothing here. We really have some idiots for companions. Look at how nervous they all got. I bet even the sound of the wind would freak those cowards out." Ha ha. His brothers laughed after hearing that, but it was only the band of siblings who found amusement in their situation. Freya turned to Zen and activated her life vitality to talk to him. "There seems to be something wrong with Koi's glint pearl. Why is the light coming from it so dim?" Glint pearls were divided into levels. The one Koi had was by no means at the highest level, but it was still an extraordinary item. It should have exuded a lot more light. If I'm not wrong, there should be a trace of the dark law around here that is suppressing the light of the glint pearl. That guy is most probably going to get himself into big trouble, Zen answered. Koi was grinning while his brothers were laughing. However, their amusement froze when they suddenly saw something in the darkness. Koi didn't seem to have noticed anything but suddenly felt a chill at the expression on his brothers' faces. He turned his head and waved the glint pearl around but still couldn't find anything in the darkness. He heaved a sigh of relief before turning to his brothers with a smile. "Come on guys, you were all messing with me just now. Stop that." However, his brothers still sported the same look of horror on their faces. One of them even pointed at Koi's body. It was then that Koi shook the glint pearl and aimed it towards himself. The sight made Freya gasp and she couldn't help but tightly grasp onto Zen's clothes. Meanwhile, his brothers retreated a few steps back in unison. The sight was horrifying. The glint pearl perfectly illuminated the way the darkness literally consumed Koi, eating away at his flesh and blood. The weird thing was that he didn't feel any pain, nor did he feel anything was amiss. However, the horrifying sight still overwhelmed him. "Ah!" he screamed, running back towards everyone. "No, don't come here, just stay there and die," his brothers all said. Despite being initially confident in their skills, their brute strength would only prove useful against ferocious beasts. The mysteries of the unknown were way scarier than any vicious creature. What should we do? Freya asked Zen in panic. However, he merely grabbed Freya's waist and let out one single order, retreat. Whoosh! Their group was quick to follow his command, along with the 6 brothers. Koi, who had been running towards them, was no match for the corrosive darkness. He rapidly lost the remainder of his body and all that remained was his skeleton that smashed loudly onto the ground. The glint pearl he once held as a beacon also rolled down the floor and reflected the dancing little moths in the dark. Chapter 11:15, Dodging in the Darkness. The glint pearl was the only glowing object amidst the dark surroundings, but little inky black moths the size of a finger continuously circled around it. The moths seemed to hate the light, so a few of them suddenly shot towards the glint pearl, and in a second the last ray of light was gone. Once again, the moths sank into the darkness. Shock was written all over Ab's face. These are cannibal moths. And here, this is the nether water. The dripping sound we heard just now was from the nether water. We should leave now. The 7 brothers who had mocked Zen just a while ago were now scared out of their wits. There was a magical insect list in the universe, and all the insects ranked in the list had extremely powerful abilities. The cannibal moth was one of the very dangerous insects included in the list. For instance, the ice jade butterfly was ranked 51st in the list. Although it was deceptively beautiful, it was immensely lethal. Any living being exposed to its cold poison would freeze quickly, even their souls would no longer fall into the path of reincarnation. The vicious cannibal moth was ranked 21st on the list. It normally lived in the form of an insect egg in the nether water, and would remain like so even after thousands of years. As long as it was under the nether water, the insect egg could live up to 100,000 to even 1,000,000 years long. However, once the cannibal moths felt the existence of a living creature and needed to search for food, the insect eggs would control the nether water and let it flow out. Then, the cannibal moths would hatch out from the insect eggs and search for food in the darkness. At that moment, Zen used his magical eyes to see the drops of nether water that dripped down from above. In a blink of an eye, the finger-sized black moths had hatched and come out of the water. They wouldn't be much of a threat if they were ordinary moths, but Zen had felt the strong aura of the extremely rare dark law. He had encountered this kind of dark law before in the enchanted barrier tower. This law power seemed to be the light's enemy and could devour all the light, which was why the underground palace was pitch black. Zen knew that the moths weren't ordinary when he saw them. Thus, he asked Lincoln to open the entrance to the underground palace the soonest possible. Meanwhile, the fearless 7 brothers seemed to ignore the danger, so Zen didn't say much anymore. He couldn't be bothered to remind them. The 7 brothers were a collective of independent warriors, so they did everything in the universe together. They had extraordinary experiences and insights, but now that they realized that those moths were cannibal moths, how could they even stay there? 2 of them named Dickie and Finn quickly rushed to the passageway in front of the underground palace. That is also, Zen saw them and wanted to say that the dark law had also engulfed that side. The 2 brothers reached the exit and had just ignited 2 oil lamps on both sides of the passageway just now, but the oil lamps' light was quite dim. It turned out that there were cannibal moths that flew towards the passageway's exit. But before Zen could even warn them, Dickie and Finn charged straight ahead. Strong cyan gales suddenly appeared from their bodies, and wrapped them in layers of cyan wind as they rushed towards the other side of the passageway. However, black spots appeared above the 2 oil lamps before they could enter the passageway. Then, the oil lamps were extinguished with a loud bang. Only 2 miserable shrieks were heard after that, followed by the audible crack of shattering bones. Once again, the entrance to the underground palace had completely sunk into darkness and deathly silence. Naturally, everyone was like a blind person without the oil lamps' light. What made everything worse was that countless cannibal moths still roamed around the area. No one wanted to make any more light rays because as long as there was light, the cannibal moths would attack them. They would end up with their flesh and blood devoured by the moths, and be left as lifeless skeletons. Moreover, it was also said that the cannibal moths could also devour souls. The most important thing about the cannibal moths was their special ability. Even if their bodies were doused in flames and shocked with lightning, they couldn't be stopped and could still attack. Freya clenched her teeth hard in the inky blackness. Even though she was terrified, she wouldn't cause Zen any trouble. She was mentally prepared since she had finally decided to follow Zen. Of course, she wouldn't regret making such a decision. What do we do now? Ball cried out and sobbed. Surviving in the dark while being chased by cannibal moths drove him crazy. Everyone, try your best to get close. After Lincoln opens the underground palace's gate, we can retreat into the underground palace, Adrian uttered in the darkness. Adrian wasn't that powerful when compared to the Hu brothers, and his strength wasn't even worth mentioning. However, he was the calmest since he and Zen were well aware of their current situation. They might have a chance to live if they managed to calm down. Being scared wouldn't help and would just make things worse. Upon hearing Adrian's words, A-flat added, "Everyone, gather over here." While the cannibal moths were small, they naturally comprehended the dark law. They seemed to be unbeatable and resistant to any damage as they flew effortlessly in the dark. On the other hand, Zen didn't gather with the rest of them. He grabbed Freya's hand instead and felt her trembling slightly. "Don't be nervous. Follow me," he whispered. Freya nodded, but remained silent. She was afraid that she would uncontrollably scream out loud if she opened her mouth. Thanks to Zen's magical eyes, he could see everything in the darkness even if the surroundings was like a black hole. As more droplets of nether water dripped down from above, the number of moths increased. They flapped towards their surroundings and covered them in a dense mesh. Zen could only rely on his own vision to save Freya from the moths' attacks. However, time was ticking and the entire space would soon be filled with the cannibal moths. But Zen still had another treasure, the token with the word, "Mountain." He could use the token to summon the fairy palace, and then take Freya there. Freya didn't know that Zen had such a marvelous token. Thus, she thought that if even those Spirit Supreme Realm warriors couldn't resist the cannibal moths, she was even more helpless. Until then, she could only rely on Zen, so she held his hand to ease the fear in her heart. "Lincoln, have you opened the door yet?" Zen gripped Freya's hand as well and slowly retreated into the darkness. His eyes looked up at the 9-head snake statue. Luckily, the cannibal moths didn't spread out to that direction. If they did and also blocked Lincoln's way, Lincoln might not open the underground palace's door. Lincoln also knew that something unexpected had happened outside, but he was currently using the method he learned from the man in the villain world to open the underground palace gate. He couldn't afford to be distracted now. He could only anxiously say, "Wait a moment. We can't wait anymore. Why are you so slow even when you're opening the door?" A-flat couldn't help but curse in the dark. He never expected to encounter such strange insects there, and he had lost 3 of his brothers in the blink of an eye. Just as the last curse slipped out of his lips, they heard another miserable scream in the dark. Clearly, another person had been taken by the cannibal moths. The moment they heard the scream, A-flat angrily punched the air and sent the next person flying. "A-flat, that's Gil," Ball said angrily. "If I don't do that, we're all going to die." A-flat coldly shot back. Everyone felt their hearts sink into despair as they kept backing away. However, the cannibal moths were everywhere. They didn't know if retreating was the right choice, but they all did it on instinct. On the contrary, it was much easier on Zen's side. He could see the distribution of the cannibal moths, so he was able to avoid attracting them as much as possible as he carefully dragged Freya along. He had managed to dodge 3 or 4 groups of cannibal moths now, but the dripping sounds continued, which meant more cannibal moths had hatched, and there was less space for Zen and Freya to retreat. Chapter 11:16. Open the door. As the space for dodging became more and more limited, Zen's gaze became incrementally more serious. Couldn't these cannibal moths be killed? Just now, Zen had also clearly seen that the instant Dicky and Finn rushed out, they had also activated their protective life vitality. At the same time, they circulated their life vitality which turned into a violent storm to protect themselves. Even so, they were still unable to resist the cannibal moths and were still hard-pressed. The strength of Dicky and Finn was as nothing when compared to that of Zen, but they were still Spirit Supreme Realm Masters. However, although there were some strange insects in the world, there should be some methods to restrain them. Generally speaking, these evil and strange insects tended to be afraid of thunder and lightning. As Zen brought Freya alongside to avoid the insects, he saw a lone cannibal moth floating slowly towards them from the darkness. Its tiny shape was ghostly in the darkened space. At this moment, an idea occurred to Zen. A ripple faintly appeared in the sea of chaotic energy within his body, as if he wanted to form a flash of lightning. "You're thinking too much, it's useless." Lavender spoke up at this moment. At the same time, the Cyan Dragon also cautioned, "The thunder law will have no effect on the cannibal moth. Moreover, the lightning that is produced by the thunder law will instead attract a greater number of cannibal moths." Hearing their warnings, Zen suppressed the power that was going to erupt. No wonder A-flat and the others hadn't used this method. "Then what should we do?" Zen asked with a frown as he looked at the phantasmal moths floating towards them with ravenous intent in their beady eyes. "Wait, just wait until the door of the underground palace is opened, then you can rush in," Lavender advised. She had entered the underground palace before, but it had been 100,000 years ago, and at that time, there hadn't been any cannibal moths. If she had encountered those cannibal moths back then, she would have reminded Zen to be well prepared, and they wouldn't now have fallen into such a difficult situation. Upon hearing Lavender's words, Zen nodded his head slightly. He could only drag Freya along as he continuously paced back and forth to avoid the moths. However, as more and more tinkling sounds rang out, the number of cannibal moths that hatched out of the nether water also increased. Soon, there was almost no room remaining for them to dodge the clumsy insects. Ah! Another blood-curdling screech rang out, and the sound of bones collapsing could be heard. It was likely that another person had been overwhelmed by the sheer number of the insects and had been devoured by the cannibal moths. Freya's heart thumped rapidly in fear. She didn't know how long they would be able to hold on in this desperate situation. Any second now, she would perhaps be devoured like the other people, with only skeletal remains left. Zen's brows furrowed deeper. The densely packed cannibal moths had already completely sealed off the surrounding space, and there seemed to be no way out. Up! Zen's eyes flashed. The space in front of the underground palace was filled with cannibal moths. If he stayed here, he would die sooner or later. However, the number of cannibal moths was relatively smaller in the space around the 9-head snake sculpture. These cannibal moths floated in the air in large, swarming clusters. There was no way to figure out their pattern of movement. Zen stood where he was without moving at all. After half a second, he saw an empty space and immediately said, "Let's go." As a blast of power suddenly surged from his body, he immediately pulled Freya along and leapt into the air. Freya felt as though the sky and the earth were spinning as she was pulled through the air by the force coming from Zen's hands. Then she landed on a snake head of the sculpture, next to Zen. However, it was pitch black and she couldn't even see her fingers in front of her face. She was dizzy and didn't know where she was right now. Zen had jumped to stand on one of the other snake heads of the 9-head snake statue and they had temporarily avoided the hordes of cannibal moths. However, the people below were in serious trouble. In just a moment, they heard Ab's anguished shout, "Ball!" It seemed that another person had died. The situation below them was still not looking good as Zen watched vigilantly. The problem was that he had no way to deal with these cannibal moths. He could only wait for Lincoln to open the door to the underground palace. Zen was not good at waiting, when there were enemies to be slain. Right at this moment, the clear sound of gears sliding through eons of rust rang out, filling the ears of everyone present with hope. After that, the entire 9-head snake statue began to rumble. "I made it!" From inside one of the snake's heads, Lincoln's voice rang out. It was likely that Lincoln had successfully opened the door to the underground palace. At the same time, several rays of incandescent light appeared in the space in front of the underground palace. These rays of incandescent light suddenly flickered through the darkened space. The entire area in front of the underground palace was illuminated as if it was daytime. Only under the blazing white light did Freya clearly see that the underground palace was covered with dense black dots that seemed almost to vibrate. And each black dot was a cannibal moth. She now knew that there should be a lot more cannibal moths around her. Zen had brought her all the way here safe and sound, so she had naturally taken it for granted that the number of cannibal moths was not too great. But now that she saw so many densely packed cannibal moths, she felt shocked. She couldn't figure out how Zen had managed to take her out from the space below while it was filled with so many cannibal moths. It seemed that Zen had run an impossible gauntlet of the creatures in the blinking of an eye. Or was it possible that he could see each of these cannibal moths? However, at present she didn't have much time to waste on thinking about such things. Zen's attention wasn't focused on the cannibal moths. His eyes reflected the bright light, and he could feel the mysterious power of space law from this light. Zen's expression looked grim. Someone is using the grand teleportation technique, and there's more than one of them. Lavender exclaimed, immediately solving Zen's quandary. The grand teleportation technique. The grand teleportation technique could only be mastered when one comprehended at least 5 layers of the space law. Obviously, the strength of the people who were being teleported was not ordinary. Very quickly, from within the 3 flickering rays of bright light, many figures emerged one after another. Demon Knight members, ogres and humans. Zen instantly realized that these fellows had probably been waiting for the underground palace to open. The cannibal moths hated light very much. The space law had produced dazzling light. At this moment, all the cannibal moths pounced on those rays of light. However, the martial artists that had come out of the masses of light seemed to be completely prepared. All of them, be they Demon Knight members or humans, held a thin yellow bamboo in their hands. From one end of the yellow bamboo came plumes of faint yellow smoke. The cannibal moths didn't fear the law power at all, but after coming into contact with the yellow smoke, they didn't have the slightest ability to resist. As the yellow smoke spiraled out, they fell from the sky one by one. In an instant, a large number of cannibal moths were killed. Ha ha, the underground palace has truly opened. It must have been 100,000 years since the last time the underground palace opened. 100,000 years back then, I was just a kid. The one who spoke was a human martial artist, and he was the Saint Lord of the Magnolia Sacred Place. 100,000 years ago, our queen has entered this underground palace. I wonder what benefits we will get this time. A woman from the Demon Knight asked calmly. This woman was the leader of the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place. The ginkgo pavilion that Zen had once visited was affiliated to the Purple Bamboo Sacred Place. The queen which she mentioned was Lavender. As for the one who led the ogres, he was the Saint Lord of the Sacred Place of the Ogres. They had been observing the situation at the entrance of the underground palace the whole time. They did not care about the life or death of Zen and the 7 brothers of the Hu family. To these leaders, life was cheap. However, the moment the door of the underground palace opened, they had brought the young elites from their sacred places and rushed over. The underground palace had previously repelled strong warriors with a high level of cultivation. The 3 leaders of the sacred places were all expectant world lords. If they rashly forced an entry into the underground palace, it would collapse and be ruined. Although the 3 powerful leaders couldn't enter, they could still send many of the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors in their sacred places into the underground palace in their stead. A-Flat had completely fallen into despair. Earlier, while still in the darkness, he had only been able to watch as his brothers died one by one, turning into piles of lifeless bones. He had not known for how long he could hold on, and when his 6 brothers had all died, a group of people suddenly appeared and easily killed those cannibal moths. He stood slack-jawed and stared at the newcomers in stunned amazement, while his emotions were in turmoil. Flames of fury then rushed into his mind. Why didn't you come earlier? Normally, A-Flat would never speak so insolently to these powerful masters. However, when he looked at the piles of bones, which were all that was left of his brothers, the bitterness in his heart overwhelmed him. The Saint Lord of the Ogres glanced coldly at A-Flat and sneered. He didn't even bother to speak to A-Flat or express his condolences. A Spirit Supreme Realm warrior was not in a position to question him. With a slight flash of his mountain-like body, a bloody light condensed at the tip of his finger. There was a mighty power contained within the blood light. Obviously, he was intent on killing Ab. Chapter 11:17. So many people. In the eyes of the Saint Lords from the 10th grade sacred places, Lincoln's group was nothing more than a key to open the door. As long as the door was opened, they were of no use to them. To kill them would be as simple as crushing an ant. A-Flat could feel the power of the bloody light. He also felt that as long as he touched even a trace of it, it was very likely that he would be reduced to ashes. His face immediately turned deathly pale. He lost control of his emotions at the deaths of his 6 brothers. Finally, he realized that he had offended people whom he never should have offended. Moreover, they were from the ogre race. People like him were nothing more than grass to them, they could trample on them as they pleased. Seeing the blood light emit out, A-Flat did not even have the courage to dodge it. After all, a world lord was 2 realms higher than him. How could he match up to that? But at this moment, the Saint Lord of the Magnolia Sacred Place reached out and a light blue screen appeared in front of Ab. The Saint Lord said indifferently, "Yosef, haven't we, the people from the 3 sacred places, agreed that we won't kill anyone, no matter which race comes to open the underground palace?" Hearing his words, the bloody light in the hands of the Saint Lord from the ogre race gradually faded away. It did not make much difference if he killed an ant. He only gave a faint snort and paid no more attention to Ab. The human Saint Lord glanced at A-Flat quickly. Considering that he was also from the human race, the Saint Lord said, "Since you've chosen to enter this underground palace, you should have been prepared to pay for it with your lives." For martial artists, to experience trials is an everyday occurrence in this world. Try your best to survive. What the human Saint Lord meant was simple. Since A-Flat led his companions to explore the underground palace, he must be ready to compensate for it with their lives. He could not accuse someone else for not rescuing him in time, just because he himself was too weak to survive. It was immature of him. How could A-Flat not understand this truth? He was just unwilling to accept it. When he looked up, he saw Lincoln, Zen, and Freya jump down from the 9-head snake statue. Once again, A-Flat felt it to be unfair. He knew Lincoln was strong, but why were Zen and Freya left unwounded? Just now, the two of them had been surrounded by the cannibal moths. How did they escape from that danger? A-flat was clueless. As Zen leapt down, the human Saint Lord's gaze landed on him. A flicker of appreciation appeared on his emotionless face. The Saint Lord saw clearly that the young man had some kind of a magical power to see through the theurgy of the Dark Law. Under the siege of the cannibal moths, he managed to evade the attacks and hold on till the last moment. Zen's gaze met the Saint Lord's for a moment and he nodded. Although it had not been long since he ascended to the upper world, he had already seen many powerful people like world lords, expectant world lords, and also those who were a half step away from a world lord. The old man in front of him was not anyone special. However, Freya sensed the cultivation of the human Saint Lord and timidly came to stand behind Zen. Previously in the spirit-reading world, Jeevan had been a figure Freya had looked up to. Freya could not believe her eyes as she stared at him. The Saint Lord felt a little strange about Zen being so calm. He had wanted to ask if the boy was an independent warrior. If so, he would take him to Magnolia's sacred place and properly nurture him. In future, Zen would certainly become a great figure. Master, everyone is here. At this time, a spirit supreme realm warrior came before the human Saint Lord, interrupting his thoughts. The Saint Lords could only get to the entrance of the underground palace. Although they had the strength to force their way in or break the enchanted barrier, they were aware that the treasures in the underground palace would be destroyed if they did so. If their cultivation was too strong, it could also trigger an annihilation. Because of this reason, not a single world lord had dared to barge into the underground palace all these years. The human Saint Lord nodded as he said, "For you, this is a rare opportunity. It has already been 100,000 years since the underground palace was last opened. You must seize this chance." Yes, Master. Although Magnolia's sacred place was a 10th grade sacred place, the Dark World did not have many advantages when compared to other supreme worlds. Even the Borderland Supreme World, Spirit Reading World, was far more equipped. Magnolia's sacred place was not too popular among the many 10th grade sacred places in the Alliance. So far, there was not a single warrior in the place who had qualified to enter the 13 palaces. There were not many opportunities left for the talents from Magnolia's sacred place. But now that the underground palace was opened, it brought them much assurance. Aside from these warriors of the human race, the talents from the ogre and the demon knight races had also prepared to enter the underground palace. As for Lincoln, he was visibly helpless. It had not been easy for him to get his hands on such a great opportunity. Finally, he had opened the underground palace. What he did not expect was that doing so would attract the attention of so many others. Could it be that these secret treasures of the Dark World was an open secret? Were these people guarding the palace for his arrival? Previously, he had been too naive. He had planned to share the secret treasures of the underground palace with Adrian and Zen. The shares would have been distributed among themselves. 30% for Adrian, 30% for Zen, and 40% for himself. But now, it seemed that he had been daydreaming. With so many people entering, who knew what he would be able to get? Moreover, Lincoln had no power and no influence. Now that the door to the underground palace had been opened, he could not just kick out the 3 Saint Lords of the sacred places with his power alone. If he had the ability to do such a thing, there would have been no need whatsoever to enter the underground palace. Seeing Lincoln's dejected look, Zen patted him on the shoulder and said, "There's still a chance. The world lords could not enter the palace. How could the talents of the Dark World compete with someone like Zen and Lincoln?" It was true that Lincoln still had a chance, but when he thought of the fact that what had originally belonged to him was now being taken over by these people, he was understandably upset. Still, he was adaptable to circumstances, so he prepared to enter the underground palace with Zen and Freya. But they did not expect what happened next. As they prepared to enter the underground palace, the Saint Lord of the ogre race snorted coldly and waved his rough hands. An invisible force restrained Zen, Lincoln, and Freya. "Little mongrels come from nowhere and wish to enter the palace ahead of my people." The 3 of them were immediately held back by the invisible barrier. Lincoln's face turned red as blood rushed to his face. He was the one to open the door, yet he was the one now being held back. This was going too far. However, the invisible energy was not something that they could resist. No matter how much Lincoln struggled, he was unable to move an inch. Seeing Lincoln struggle so much, a faint smile emerged on the ogre Saint Lord's face. If he had not made the promise to the other 2 Saint Lords, he would have killed them a long time ago. To the Saint Lord of the ogre race, Zen, Lincoln, and the others were merely the key to the underground palace. Once it was opened, it hardly mattered what happened to these warriors. When the human Saint Lord saw this, he did not say a word to stop them. As long as the Saint Lord of the ogre race did not kill anyone, he would not be breaking any rules. Suppressed by the invisible power of the Saint Lord of the ogre race, Zen's mouth twisted into a tight frown. Suddenly, the power of the dragon scale surged up inside his body. He stared at the invisible power as he lifted his foot. The Saint Lord of the ogre race possessed the cultivation of a world lord, but due to the history of the Dark World, there were no world lords. Therefore, he could be considered an expectant world lord who had the cultivation of a world lord, but did not possess the true abilities of that title. Similarly, the Saint Lord from the spiritual force sacred place in the spirit reading world was also an expectant world lord. Although the invisible force that bound Zen and the others did not look anything extraordinary, the Saint Lord of the ogre race possessed a cultivation of a world lord. He was one of the top 3 warriors in this supreme world, and so his invisible power was unimaginably great. Lincoln, who was beside him, struggled furiously, but it was next to impossible for him to break free from the restraints of the invisible energy. However, Zen continued to activate the dragon scales one by one. As the incrementing power poured into his body, he took a big step toward the entrance of the underground palace under the restraint of the immense invisible force of the Saint Lord of the ogre race. The Saint Lord could not help but exclaim in surprise. He looked at Zen with bewilderment. Chapter 11:18, The Endless Abyss. It made no sense. How was it possible that Zen, a warrior who had just reached the Soul Sea realm, could break free from his restraining power? Yosef could hardly believe his eyes. His binding technique didn't look threatening, but it made up for what it lacked in presentation of strength, like a giant bearing down his weight to squash a minuscule, feeble insect. Perhaps he too had been fooled by appearances. This particular insect he was dealing with was much stronger than he thought. Zen felt a huge force pressing down on his body. He was struggling, but he was able to resist it, walking with big, forceful steps towards the entrance of the underground palace. Not only Yosef had been surprised by the sudden turn of events. The Saint Lords of the Demon Knight and the humans watched with strange expressions on their faces. Clearly, none of them had expected this. How interesting, Yosef sneered. He was not one to lose. Once more, he raised his hand to press a thick finger towards Zen, doubling the force of his bindings. Zen felt a greater force enveloping his body. He was the sole target of Yosef's technique, and all of its power was directed at him. He felt his muscles complain as the force around him grew heavier. For a moment, Zen closed his eyes and focused. With a deep breath, he activated the power of more than 10,000 dragon scales in his body. The spectators watched Zen pause for a moment. The next thing they heard was a loud crackle coming from within his body as it expanded. Hey! Blood rushed to Yosef's head as rage took over him. It was simply ridiculous that a mere warrior at the Soul Sea realm would be able to subdue the strength of his giant finger. In a fury-filled move, he poured all strength and sent his entire palm towards Zen's head. Yosef, think about your position. You are a Saint Lord. It would be disgraceful to compete with a junior. The human Saint Lord could no longer stand Yosef's contemptible pride. With a light wave of his hand, he dispelled the tremendous force that came from Yosef to Zen. The next second, Zen felt freed from the invisible force that bound him earlier. The human Saint Lord then released the force that had been suppressing Lincoln's and Freya's bodies. The human Saint Lord's words poured over Yosef's senses like ice, dousing his rage and pulling him back to his senses. Yosef chuckled, I am not competing with him. I just think that he is a bit interesting. With Yosef's anger visibly placated, a smile curled on the human Saint Lord's face. He had thought the same exact thing. Just now, he helped Zen because he could sense his potential. It would be a waste not to see what the promising young warrior could do in the future. After they had explored the underground palace, he planned on taking him into the Magnolia sacred place. With no one stopping Zen and the others, they walked quickly towards the entrance of the underground palace. Adrian, who was not far away, had a smile plastered on his face as he said loudly, Lincoln, please wait for me. Time was of the essence. Adrian knew that if he didn't follow them in now, he would lose the chance to enter under the eyes of the Saint Lords present. He spoke to Lincoln in a familiar way deliberately, because it would help make sure that no one was likely to stop him. A-Flat had been scared out of his wits. When he saw Adrian following the group, he decided to follow him closely from behind. The underground palace of the Dark World opened, and the 4 of them were the first ones to enter. Soon after, the martial artists of the ogres, the Demon Knight, and humans entered the underground palace after them. A dark yellow enchanted barrier was placed in front of the entrance. It was an ancient spell, but its effects remained to be potent. Zen passed the barrier with ease. He lifted his foot and passed through it, with Lincoln, Freya, Adrian and A-flat stepping inside next. The moment Zen passed through the barrier, it was as if his foot landed on air. The next moment, he found himself suddenly plummeting downwards. He was plunging down into a bottomless abyss. The same happened to Lincoln, Freya, A-flat, and Adrian. In this situation, ordinary martial artists would direct their life vitality in an attempt to stabilize their bodies in the air and moderate the rapid fall. Freya, Lincoln and the others did this very thing, channeling their energy to float in the air. However, it proved to be completely useless. A-flat had even used the wind law to form a strong storm underneath him. Even this failed to stop his fall. As for Zen, he took a step forward, and with a slight flash, he grabbed onto Freya and took another step, attempting to travel through the space. He had used the space law, but the resulting occurrence was very strange. He had traveled some distance, but the moment he came out of the space, he and Freya did not elevate but proceeded to fall. How strange, Lincoln remarked. They had tried many different methods, but not one of these succeeded. They kept falling downward into the dark abyss. Ah, what is going on? A shout echoed through the space. Zen looked up to see that the martial artists sent by the three Saint Lords were also falling downward with them. They were in an unfamiliar territory, but Zen calmed himself down. There was no use panicking. Lavender, what's going on? He asked. Well, Lavender smiled mischievously, I'm just giving you a little surprise. Welcome to the Endless Abyss, she said cheerfully. The Endless Abyss? Yes, it was constructed by the Supreme Lord from remote ages. Flight is impossible here, everyone and everything that enters will only descend continuously. In an instant, Lavender's smile disappeared, her face returning to an indifferent mask. So we just keep falling down like this? Zen asked. You could say that. Don't worry, you won't be falling to your death, Lavender replied. They continued to fall towards the bottom of the abyss, dropping at an accelerating speed. It was only after they reached a certain distance that their speed stabilized. They had been like a house of cards in a thunderstorm, but after a while, they got used to the sensation and started to wonder when they would stop as their eyes searched aimlessly in the darkness. The weakest of the martial artists who entered the underground palace were at the Soul Sea realm. Most of them were at the Spirit Supreme realm, so they remained undaunted with the fall in the darkness. They were, however, on tenterhooks from the vast, unknown space. There was no telling what awaited them at the bottom of this abyss. They continued to descend, their senses tingling with agitation. As the wind blew past their ears, they kept falling for 5 minutes. As they descended, Zen's eyes wandered around the surroundings within the abyss. It was impossible to decipher what sort of theurgy the Supreme Lord had used, or the reason why he built such a strange abyss. However, one thing was clear. The Creator had undergone great lengths in order to construct the dark space. Having reached a wall with his questions, Zen turned to ask Lavender once again. I do not know, she answered simply. 100,000 years ago when I explored this abyss, my cultivation was just at the Spirit Supreme realm. I am more or less familiar with the underground palace, but I had not succeeded in discovering all of its secrets. The Supreme Lord's origins are obscure and mysterious. Until today, no one has been able to uncover his true identity. There is a possibility that he constructed his own grave in this way in order to choose a worthy successor. That, however, is only my guess. A long time had passed since the abyss, creation. No one knew what sort of tribulations the Creator had gone through in the past before he built the underground palace. Be careful, Lavender warned. If I remember correctly, the first ordeal in the endless abyss should arrive at this time. Zen's blood froze as he looked down. There, at the bottom of the pit were dark green vines as thick as an arm, their spikes densely packed together. He was only several thousand feet away from the vines. At the rate of their fall, the vines would pierce them immediately. Chapter 11:19, Lashing. There was still a slight difference between their falling speeds. After descending for a while, they realized that even though they could not fly up above, they could change their stature and adjust their speeds. By lowering one's head, the 4 limbs would naturally come together and the falling speed would increase. By stretching one's limbs, the speed of one's descent would decrease because of the fluttering clothes. Right now, none of them had any idea how to deal with their current crisis. They tried to adjust their speeds to be as slow as possible and stuck close to each other. With this rapid descent, they charged into the dense vines. Mysterious life law surfaced on these vines. It was as if they had their own set of brains. As Zen and the others came to be surrounded by the vines turned into long whips and lashed out at them. Pa, 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 loud sounds erupted from the lashing vines, akin to the explosion of a firecracker. Except for Zen, the other warriors activated their life vitality to protect themselves quickly. Most of the ogres summoned their forceful energy to shield their bodies as soon as they could. However, the power contained in these vines far exceeded their imaginations. As a vine lashed out, a warrior's life vitality was instantly torn apart. He would be fiercely smashed into the deep abyss walls and continue to fall down. No one was able to fly or adjust their positions, so they could hardly dodge the vines. The vines seemed to contain some kind of special power which was strong and intense. No matter what treasure or cultivation method one used, the vines would break through and whip the warrior's body. The pain almost instantly killed him. It was as if the vines were whipping him both physically and mentally. Miserable cries echoed through the abyss. The warriors twisted in pain, their faces revealing their suffering. Zen was the only one who seemed calm in the face of the vines lashing at him. The whips were strong, but it was impossible for them to break through his divine weapon-like body. The whipping only caused him to twist and spin. The pain was easily dispelled by a warm current flowing through his body. However, when he turned around to look, he saw Freya being whipped by the vines. Her body twisted in the air at an uncontrollable speed. Zen had thought that Freya was a timid girl from how she had acted before. Facing the cannibal moths, she had been so frightened that she had lost control and tightly held on to Zen. Right now, however, she appeared to be resilient. Ever since Freya had ascended, her state of mind experienced great ups and downs. Although she did not understand what kind of destiny Zen possessed and what future he would have, what happened along the way made her deeply understand that following Zen was the right choice for her, even if it were to be his servant. She did not want to cause trouble for Zen, but in the face of danger at the entrance of the underground palace, she had inevitably become a burden to him. Even though Zen did not say anything, Freya blamed silently herself for not being strong enough. The pain of the lashes seeped into her heart. However, she tightly clenched her teeth despite the unbearable pain, for she did not want Zen to worry. To be precise, she did not want him to detest her. She did not make a sound as she tolerated the pain of the whips one at a time. When he saw this, Zen smiled slightly. He stretched his limbs and slowed in his descent. He then approached Freya quickly and pulled her into his arms. Freya, who was trying her best to endure the beating of the vines, was startled upon being embraced by someone so suddenly. Only a moment later did she realize that it was Zen who was embracing her. "Let go of me," Freya struggled weakly. Zen, however, shook his head indifferently as he said, "It's all right. My thick and leathery skin will save me from the vines. Don't worry." Freya pursed her lips and carefully adjusted her body, not daring to struggle anymore. Zen's arms protected her from the lashes, but Zen himself was now being subjected to the whips. Screams of pain lingered in the atmosphere and reached Freya's ears. No matter the ogres, human warriors, or Lincoln, every time they were whipped by the vines, they cried out in pain, their faces contorting with misery. Although Freya felt embarrassed being embraced like this by Zen, a flicker of happiness engulfed her heart. Ever since she had ascended, her original illusion of the upper world had been completely shattered. She had drowned in disappointment. However, there was no such thing as a time machine. Now that she had already ascended, she had no way to return to the lower world. But at this moment, she realized that she had made the right choice. Perhaps, the heaven had arranged for her to meet Zen at the ascending well so she could follow him. Falling into this abyss, the warriors were whipped by the vines for 2 whole hours. 2 hours later, they finally descended far enough to escape the area covered in vines. The vines disappeared, and the abyss turned bottomless once again. The faces of the warriors had turned as pale as ghosts. The pain they had just suffered had been far beyond what average humans could bear. The warriors who had reached the Soul Sea realm or the Spirit Supreme realm were much sturdier and tougher. Their bearing capacity surpassed that of most other warriors. However, they too had been unable to stand those vines. What just happened had been like a nightmare to them. Heavens, what kind of a nightmare is this underground palace? An ogre roared. Even though he was an ogre whose leathery skin could stand even a sword attack, he had failed to take the pain of being whipped by the vines. "I heard from Saint Lord that there is no bottom to the abyss. The only way to gain something is to repeat the falling process again and again. With each circulation, one can obtain a part of the Supreme Lord's treasures," another ogre said. In fact, Lavender was not the first to enter the underground palace. She got into the palace through the 6th, Snake Head, and this time they had entered through the 7th, Snake Head. This meant that the underground palace had already been opened 5 times before Lavender. There were 6 broken, snake heads, on the previously 9-head snake statue. Zen kept looking downward as he fell. Lavender had already told Zen that this was his chance to improve himself. He would not give up or change his mind. He was confident in his own talent, but just like Lavender had pointed out, compared to the other geniuses of the upper world, Zen lacked resources, not talent. Zen decided to do his best to gather resources along the way. In the upper world, it was the effective way for him to grow stronger. Lost in thoughts, Zen heard a timid voice. Zen, could you let me go? Hearing this, Zen realized that they had already passed the vines. There was no longer any need for him to keep Freya in his arms. He loosened his grip and gently let Freya go. He gave an embarrassed smile and said, "Sorry." Freya's face blushed a little. As she stared at Zen's embarrassed face, she realized how interesting he was. She then made up her mind. No matter how hard it got to pass the abyss of the underground palace, she would follow Zen closely. The warriors tried to maintain a normal speed as they fell. From the moment they had entered the underground palace, they had descended tens of millions of feet already. They did not know when it would come to an end. After experiencing the whipping of the vines, they had become even more vigilant. Only then did Zen ask Lavender, "What will happen if we go further down?" Let me think. 100,000 years have passed since I was here last time. I need some time to recall. Lavender hesitated for some moments before continuing. If I remember correctly, the second round is the Blade Mountain Trap. The Blade Mountain Trap. Although Zen didn't understand what this was, a bad premonition rose in his heart as he heard the name. Chapter 11:20, Trick. The warriors who entered the endless abyss wished to possess the treasures of the underground palace. But after experiencing the attacks of the strange vines, the warriors realized that the benefits of the underground palace were not to be easily obtained. Most of the warriors had tolerated the whips of the vines, but other than Zen and Freya, most of them had suffered light or heavy internal injuries. Moreover, the whips of the vines had obviously cast a shadow over the warriors. The first round of the endless abyss had been tough to tolerate. The next test would no doubt be even more difficult. It had to be known that the warriors were only talents of the 3 10th grade sacred places in the dark world. Whether it was the human magnolia sacred place, the demon knight's purple bamboo sacred place, or even the ogre's sacred place, none of them could be considered as particularly important or popular compared to the sacred places in other supreme worlds. Among the talents sent out by the 3 races, a few of them were at the Soul Sea realm, while the majority were at the Spirit Supreme realm. They might be slightly stronger, but they could not be compared to the talents of the 13 palaces. Entering the endless abyss meant that they would encounter opportunities to grow stronger. However, the treasures obtained would need to be handed over to their respective sacred places. Presently, many warriors were beginning to want to retreat. The issue was that they fell straight down as they stepped into the abyss. They could not manage to fly, so they could not go back. Just as everyone was starting to feel depressed, they saw something deep in the abyss. Purple dots of light floated in the air at a distance. These purple lights were in a relatively motionless state. However, because everyone was falling rapidly, they felt the lights rapidly approach them in their vision. What are those dots? Some of the warriors reacted quickly and reached out to grab the spots of purple light. Hey, those are divine textures. It's an ancient divine texture. It seems like the purple spots can help us return to the entrance. A warrior cried out in excitement. Zen and Freya also grabbed onto a purple light dot respectively. The moment they caught hold of them, indescribable consciousness effused from the dots. Everyone instantly understood their function. Return. Zen smiled as he held the dot and crushed it with a gentle pinch. It seemed like the Supreme Lord from remote ages did not set up the endless abyss simply because he wanted to lure warriors to their deaths. Even though the endless abyss was clearly full of danger, the Supreme Lord had given them a chance to go back on their decision. The warriors who had been on the verge of retreat were naturally overjoyed. They understood the use of the divine texture. They had been worrying about how to withdraw just before the divine textures appeared before them. How could they not be elated? They quickly activated the divine textures in their hands. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Very soon, a faint light enveloped their figures. At the same time, they stopped falling and with a rapid speed rose up into the sky, still engulfed by the purple light. In the blink of an eye, the number of warriors in the endless abyss decreased by about half. Zen's eyes landed on Freya, who was deep in thought as she held a purple dot of light in her hand. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Hearing Zen's words, Freya's face was slightly frozen. Truthfully, Freya was not willing to contribute to Zen's troubles. Before this trip to the Dark World, She had thoroughly looked into any information on the dark world in order to prove her value. She only wished that she could help Zen when he asked for it. Freya could absorb and supplement the detailed knowledge, but her cultivation and strength would only accumulate slowly, day by day. If she stayed in the endless abyss, it would only bring Zen more trouble. Thus, when she realized that the purple light could send her back, her first thought was to leave. However, after thinking for a while, Freya did not activate the divine texture. Instead, she put away the purple dot of light with a turn of her hand. I want to carry on for a little longer. Although it was dangerous, Freya still wanted to see how far she could go in this endless abyss. In fact, Freya herself noticed that her personality and character seemed to be affected in Zen's presence. Her confidence was also recovering little by little. As long as she stayed by his side, she would always be able to feel his confidence. People around Zen were easily influenced by his strength and luck. They became determined like him. Good, Zen nodded, try your best. The remaining warriors did not activate the divine texture. However, just like Freya, most of them did not crush the purple dots, rather they put them away. If they were unable to pass the next test, or if their lives were at stake, they could choose to activate the divine texture at a later stage. However, one other person did the same thing as Zen. It was Lincoln. The moment he obtained the purple dot of light, he crushed the divine texture straight away, for he understood that it could be used to retreat to the entrance. Lincoln was seething silently. Supreme Lord Winfred had almost killed him. Facing such an opponent, Lincoln had to go all out. He had to enhance his own cultivation as far as possible before the illusion battlefield opened up. This opening of the underground palace was his greatest opportunity to do so, so he absolutely could not allow himself to give up. The warriors continued to descend. 5 minutes after passing the purple dots of light, a thin white line suddenly appeared at the bottom of the abyss. The thin line ran through the middle of the abyss, splitting it into 2 hemispheres. What's that? Someone asked. Because they were still far away from it, they were unable to see clearly what the line was. But as they got closer, someone shouted, "Blade! It's a huge blade." Zen's face grew grave. It was indeed a blade. Since the blade's tip was right at the top, they only saw a white line flashing with sharp light. But the huge blade was not a threat to the group. After all, no one would be stupid enough to crash into it. However, as the first huge blade appeared, a second one followed. This second one was also placed in the abyss, but the blade was only half exposed. As they looked at the blades, they felt a chill in their hearts. If they turned their bodies, it would still be easy for them to avoid them. Is this the Blade Mountain trap? Zen asked Lavender. Lavender smiled. You'll know soon enough. Just as she finished speaking, 3 giant blades surfaced in the abyss, forming a small angle at their top. Although the number of blades had increased, the warriors still had space to dodge them because of the wide cross-section of the abyss. Only one person was not careful enough. He fell passing by one of the blades and was almost cut into 2 pieces. However, as everyone continued to descend, the number of blades in the abyss grew. 4, 5, 6. As they fell, there was no place for them to dodge the incoming attack. Their bodies were not nimble enough to shift around. They carefully avoided the nearing blades, but they were still surrounded by danger. One of the warriors was not able to shift in time and his arm was cut off by the blade. Drops of blood splashed out like rain of blood. Hearing the pitiful cry, Freya bit her lip and stared at the blade below her. One could imagine what it would be like being cut by that blade. If the vines only gave her a painful whipping, the blades would cost her life. She focused her attention on trying to dodge the silver-white blades. However, just as was the case with the other warriors, it was difficult to reverse directions in the air. They were very inflexible at the moment. Thinking of this, an idea suddenly flashed in Freya's mind. She looked toward the top of the abyss. Then, she turned her body and slowly approached the side. Seeing Freya's movements, Zen's face was filled with doubt. At the same time, Lavender's voice rang out, "Ha ha, that girl is quite smart. She has discovered the trick so quickly."